Chapter 987. Miserable and miserable, Gue Tunluo fled in panic in the void with a group of ghosts. Far behind him, countless creatures from the outworlds chased after him like locusts who had smelled blood. Because there were too many of them, they formed a thick dark cloud in the void, obscuring the light of the stars as they chased after Gue Tunluo. Gnashing his teeth, Gue Tunluo fled with countless heavenly ghosts in front of him. Heavenly ghosts had the ability to travel through the void, so they were much faster than their pursuers, so they did not have to worry about being caught up. But the humiliation of being forced to leave his home made Gue Tunluo's eyes burn with hatred. The myriad ghosts' banner was extremely powerful, and Gue Tunluo was even confident that he could fight a Dao fusing expert for a short time with its power. However, the number of natal demon gods in the myriad ghost banner was too small. Although it had a great advantage against a small number of enemies, when faced with enemies that were hundreds, thousands, or even hundreds of millions of times greater, the myriad ghost banner's power could not be unleashed. I need more bodies of fallen fiend gods. Gue Tunluo gritted his teeth and thought to himself. Countless chaos fiend gods had fallen in ancient times, but more than 90% of them had died with their bodies and souls destroyed, and only a few of them had their bodies intact. He had searched the entire world of ghosts and souls, but he had only managed to gather these few natal demons. Where could he find more demon gods' corpses? Just as he was worrying about this, a huge hole suddenly appeared in the void diagonally, and a huge figure wrapped in a black and sticky fiend flame rushed out of it. The blurry figure roared furiously at the huge hole, "I'll be back. I'll be back to get even with you. Anyone who offends me will die a horrible death. I'm telling you, I'm going to wipe out your whole race." A deafening rumble rang out as countless strange creatures from the outer realms rushed out of the huge hole. The giant figure in the fiend flame turned and fled without saying a word, running shoulder to shoulder with Gue Tunluo. They exchanged a glance, and Gue Tunluo suddenly burst into gloating laughter. "Old fiend, your lair has been raided as well. Hee hee, how many years has it been? You're such a good-for-nothing, you've actually taken refuge in the celestial court. Your disciples and their disciples' disciples are fighting fiercely with Lao Tzu's descendants." The giant glared angrily at Gue Tunluo and sneered, "Gue Tunluo, if you have time to laugh at me, why don't you think of a way to save your own life? Ha, ha ha, you ran out with this group of Japanese people. Could it be that your home was raided as well?" Countless tiny specters in the devilish flames laughed at the same time. He was the patriarch of the primordial fiend realm, which was separated from Pangu world, and had the same status as Gue Tunluo in the ghost realm. The fiend realm was also fiercely attacked by the invading outworlds. Caught off guard, he killed and wounded countless creatures with his disciples, but when he ran out of magic power, he could only flee in panic. However, the flying speed of the fiend immortals, fiends, and fiends of all sizes was limited. They didn't have the racial divine abilities of the heavenly ghosts, which allowed them to break through the void and escape at will. Therefore, Tai Origin used his natal fiend flame to transform into a void, bringing all the fiends of the fiend realm with him and fleeing into the void. Now that Tai Origin demon was laughing at Gue Tunluo, the fiends in the fiend flame naturally echoed their patriarch's words and laughed at Gue Tunluo. Gue Tunluo spat angrily. The ghost and the fiends stared at each other coldly for a while, then glanced at the pursuers behind them. They no longer wanted to waste their saliva in a fight, so they just kept their heads down and fled as fast as they could. Everyone was running for their lives. Putting aside the eldest brother and the second brother, no one was more glorious than the other, so it was better to focus on fleeing with the others. Along the way, they passed through countless heavenly realms with countless heavenly ghosts, and the outworlds had divided their forces to invade inhabited planets, large and small. 90% of the humans from the outworlds had returned to Pangu continent with the outer heavenly realms, but there were still 10% living on countless planets. On these planets were the immortals and cultivators from the immortal sects who had invaded Pangu continent. Although the main forces of the immortal sects had invaded Pangu continent under the orders of the Celestial Court and the Buddhist League to fight against Diyu, they had basically left more than 30% of their forces in their sects to protect the foundations left by their ancestral masters. 10% were humans, and 30% were immortals and itinerant cultivators. It was a huge number, countless times larger than the number of the invading outworlds. The tough, brutal, and sadistic outworlds, whose brains were controlled by their appetites, roared and rushed into these planets, taking the lead in launching desperate attacks on the immortals in the Blessed Caves. All outer world creatures came to Pan-gu world to hunt for food. To them, the spirit blood of ordinary human beings was nothing more than an appetizer, but to powerful immortals and cultivators, it was a real feast. Therefore, all the outworlds were temporarily dismissive of the mortals, and all their attention was focused on the immortals and cultivators. For a moment, the countless blessed caves in the outer heavenly realms had turned into azuras, and the outworlds who had invaded Pangu world were showing signs of wiping out the entire Taoist heritages of the Tao League and the Buddhist League in the outer heavenly realms. The bases of all the immortal sects who had invaded Pangu continent were still on those planets in the outer heavenly realms. Their scriptures, various tokens and magical treasures left behind by their ancestral masters, and even the remains of their fallen ancestral masters were all left in their sections. If these sects were completely wiped out by the invading fiend gods, they would, in a sense, become rootless duckweeds. The Wahuang clan did not strike, but when she did, it was with the intention of wiping out the weeds. The 7 Buddhist patriarchs and the 9 Tao patriarchs would never dare to do this to the human race. The human race enjoyed the great fortune of heaven and earth, and was protected by the heavenly Tao of Pangu world. Even existences of the Tao fusing realm would be killed if they dared to destroy the human race. But, the heavenly Tao of Pangu world had never protected immortals and Buddhas. Even if the Wahuang clan killed all the immortals and Buddhas, the heavenly Tao would only bestow her with immeasurable virtues. Perhaps only today would the 7 Buddhist patriarchs and the 9 Tao patriarchs truly understand what it meant to never offend a woman. Gue Tunluo and Taishir Demon, the 2 black-bellied men, exchanged a glance when they saw the endless pursuers looting and attacking the Taoist and Buddhist temples along the way. Then, they led the pursuers in a circle in the outer heavenly realms. They deliberately brought their pursuers to the most famous and powerful Taoist and Buddhist sects for a stroll. Wherever they passed, the fiend celestials of the other realms would split up and launch bloody attacks on the Taoist and Buddhist sects as though they had discovered a new continent. The number of fiend gods chasing after Gue Tunluo and Taishir Demon gradually decreased, but the number of immortal sects they had harmed increased. After fleeing in the void for more than half a year, they had no idea how many immortal sects had been harmed by the 2 villains. Just as they were figuring out where to lead the pursuers to, countless fiend gods from the outer heavenly realms came whistling toward them, and the ones leading them were also old acquaintances of Gue Tunluo and Taishir Demon, the desolate emperor of the demon realm and the Bailing queen of the spirit realm. The 4 of them met head-on and quickly communicated with their divine sense. Gue Tunluo laughed strangely for a while, then waved his hand and sent all the ghost children and grandchildren behind him into the small world he had created. With that, Gue Tunluo led a small number of pursuers and fled into the distance, while the other 3 led countless pursuers straight into the sky. Putting aside the Tai origin demon, the desolate emperor, and the Bailing empress, Gue Tunluo continued to provoke his pursuers as he flew higher into the sky. Along the way, they flew past countless natural barriers and restrictive spells. Suddenly, a bright light shone down in front of them, and 33 vast cloud platforms appeared in the distance. Each of them was connected by a long golden staircase. They had arrived at the 33 heavens, the foundation of heaven. Tens of thousands of miles away, the tall and magnificent southern heaven gate, which constantly emitted a boundless golden light, was teetering on the verge of collapse. The 8 heavenly kings stationed at the gate of the celestial court were leading countless heavenly soldiers and generals in a desperate battle with the fiend gods from the outer heavenly realms. In addition to the 8 heavenly kings, Grand Emperor Huang Zhengtian, who was stationed at the first heaven of the celestial court, was accompanied by countless immortal officials, immortal monarchs, heavenly lords, spirit officers, heavenly generals, heavenly marshals, and countless other immortals and heavenly soldiers. The fiend gods from the outer heavenly realms were ferocious, but with their excellent immortal armors, well-trained formations, and the countless defensive formations that the celestial court had set up over the years, the celestial court was barely able to fight the fiend gods at the southern heaven gate. As the most important gate of the celestial court, the southern heaven gate itself was a chaotic spirit artifact with great power. When the soldiers of the celestial court fought near the gate, their cultivation base would increase by at least 3 tiers on average, while the enemy's strength would be suppressed by at least 30%. On top of that, the southern heaven gate had sealed off the void, and the only passable area was less than 10 miles wide. Thus, the fiend gods from the outer heavenly realms could not deploy their forces. Sword beams and saber shadows were everywhere, and thunderbolts and flames were shooting everywhere. Deafening booms kept ringing out, and thousands of heavenly soldiers, generals, and creatures from the outer heavenly realms were smashed to a pulp with every snap of a finger. Once the bodies of the heavenly soldiers and generals were shattered, their souls would immediately be protected by an invisible force and sent into the void. Once the bodies of the creatures from the outer heavenly realms were shattered, the immortal light on the southern heaven gate would sweep across and shatter their souls into the tiniest particles. The two sides were barely in a stalemate, but thousands of powerful fiend gods from the outer heavenly realms were attacking the southern heaven gate. Once the gate collapsed, given Grand Emperor Huang Xingtian's lowliest position in the celestial court and his weak army, the first heaven would immediately be massacred by the fiend gods. With a smug smile, Gui Tunluo transformed into a beam of black light and rushed to the southern heaven gate. Showing no mercy to the damage to his myriad ghost banner, he threw it at the gate with all his might. A black torrent came whistling down from tens of thousands of miles high, accompanied by the howling of countless ghosts. The southern heaven gate, which was already on the verge of collapse, was struck by Gui Tunluo's all-out attack, and the golden gateway immediately collapsed. The southern heaven gate groaned and turned into a beam of bright light, shooting straight out of the 33 heavens. Meanwhile, the fiend gods from the outer heavenly realms, who were blocked outside the gate and unable to launch a full-scale attack, scattered and rushed into Huang Xingtian like a tide breaking through a dam. Gui Tunluo burst into wild laughter, then disappeared with a sway of his body. The fiend gods from the outer heavenly realms who had followed him were stunned for a moment, then roared and rushed into the celestial court as well. Pale golden immortal blood flowed all over the ground as the heaven immortals inside Huang Xingtian were slaughtered. The light in the celestial court dimmed a little as clouds and smoke swept in from all directions. Chapter 988. The Great Vulture Mountain, an important place of Buddhism, was not just one mountain, but the collective name of 7 huge mountain ranges. The 7 patriarchs of Buddhism were born in the chaos. They were brothers who had been helping each other since before the creation of the world, until today, when they founded the prosperous Buddhism. After their birth, they did not refine their bodies into magical armors like the other chaos fiend gods, nor did they use Yuan Ling's nether realm as a herb garden to grow herbs like the old man in Wu Chi's previous life, but turned it into 7 mountains, which became the foundation of Buddhism. Each of the 7 mountains had a different shape. They stretched for trillions of miles and floated in the vast void. 7 beams of light shone down from the sky, causing the 7 mountains to shine with light. From far away, these 7 majestic mountains could be seen. The mountains were connected end to end, forming a long chain of mountains in the void like a dragon. From the beginning to the end, the Great Vulture Mountain was protected by countless restrictive spells of Buddhism. If anyone wanted to go up the mountain, they had to go from the first mountain, Mount Wonderful Sound, to the second, Mount Watching Tide, to the third, Mount Listening Wave, to the fourth, Mount Thunder Sound, then Mount Iron Barrier, Mount Wonderful Abode, and finally the 7th, Mount Thousand Buddha. The Great Spirit Vulture Mountain was formed by these 7 mountains. The spirit veins in the mountain were intertwined like a divine dragon, and the countless restrictions were like the scales of the divine dragon. The entire Great Spirit Vulture Mountain had been nurtured and refined by the Buddhist Dharma for so many years. The mountain was indestructible, and the surrounding void was covered by powerful restrictions. Without permission, outsiders could not even take a step into the mountain. In the gap between 2 mountains in front of Mount Wonderful Sound, there was a narrow path paved with bluestones. It went up the mountain for more than 100 miles, and there was a small temple that occupied an area of only about 300 feet. There were 3 to 5 monks chanting scriptures in the temple all year round, and 7 to 8 Taoists cleaning the place. The temple did not have a name, but there was a foot-tall stone tablet at the corner of the mountain path several hundred feet in front of the temple, with the words Great Vulture Mountain carved on it. Ordinary people could not enter the void, and even immortals could not find Gridrakota Mountain. Those who had the strength to see Gridrakota Mountain could not set foot on this path even if they came to the front of the mountain. If there was a primordial immortal who had the strength to set foot on this path, he would only be able to reach this tiny stone tablet before he was crushed by the immense power of will. Other than the Buddhist disciples who had received permission, which outsider would dare to enter the Great Grizzly Vulture Mountain? After all, these 7 mountains were derived from the mother bodies of the 7 Buddhist patriarchs. Stepping on the Great Spiritual Eagle Mountain was equivalent to stepping on the bodies of the 7 Buddhas. If one was not a core disciple of the Buddhist patriarchs, how could the 7 Buddhas allow one to step on them? I would have used my methods to turn you into ashes long ago. But today, countless fiend celestials from other domains surrounded Great Spirit Vulture Mountain. Looking in all directions, Great Spirit Vulture Mountain was densely packed with fiend celestials from other domains. There was no starlight at all. The path leading into the mountain was also crowded with countless fiend celestials. Howling, they pushed and shoved strange creatures of their own or different clans forward with all their strength. The stone tablet with the words Great Spiritual Eagle Mountain carved on it had been uprooted. An unknown green liquid had transformed into a liquid ball with a diameter of dozens of feet and wrapped around it. No matter how the colorful Buddhist light emitted from the stone tablet burned the liquid ball and made it sizzle, the stone tablet could not break free from the confinement of the liquid ball no matter how hard it tried. A few fiend celestials who looked like a combination of scorpions and centipedes were guarding the side. When they saw the liquid ball evaporate, their lower bodies immediately sprayed out a large amount of mucus and added it into the liquid ball, maintaining the confinement of the stone tablet. In front of the nameless temple, dozens of Buddhas with golden bodies and avatars were leading thousands of bodhisattvas and tens of thousands of arhats to form a formation shaped like a lotus flower. They were emitting a clear Buddhist light that carried a faint sandalwood aroma, blocking the only way into the mountain. Nearly 1,000 powerful fiend celestials had shrunk their bodies to the size of an ordinary human. Standing on the flat ground in front of the temple, they kept unleashing all kinds of divine abilities and mystic arts, causing the Buddhist light to vibrate violently and produce thunderous booms. These fiend celestials came from dozens of different worlds and hundreds of different clans. Their cultivation bases were extremely strong, and if they were fighting one-on-one, they could easily kill these dozens of Buddhas. But the cultivation techniques of Buddhist League were best at defense. The dozens of Buddhas and their disciples formed a Buddhist formation, emitting the Buddhist light of sandalwood infinite merit to seal off the mountain entrance. Their Buddhist light was not as simple as 1 + 1 = 2, but multiplied by several times. And when these fiend celestials attacked, it was extremely messy. They had no order and did not know how to cooperate. They only relied on their ferocious aura to crazily tear apart the flexible Buddhist light in front of them. Although the Buddhist light was vibrating violently, there was always a time gap between their attacks, giving these Buddhas time to catch their breaths, allowing them to rapidly repair the damaged Buddhist light and barely maintain the integrity of the Buddhist light. In the countless Buddhist forests on the 7 mountains, billions of sons of Buddhas chanted Buddhist mantras at the same time. Massive psyche force came surging through the air as billions of sons of Buddhas, either from 100 or thousands of reincarnations, injected into the bodies of these dozens of Buddhas. Although there were only dozens of Buddhas attacking, it was no different than all the Buddhist Vedanta stationed in the entire Great Gridrakota Mountain attacking at the same time. With 1,000 fiend celestials fighting against countless sons of Buddhas, even though these fiend celestials had an absolute advantage in cultivation bases, they still could not tear through the layer of Buddhist light that looked extremely thin, even thinner than a strand of hair. The fiend celestials howled anxiously. They stared at the dozens of Buddhas in front of them through the water-clear Buddhist light, like starving wolves who had seen a delicious white sheep, but could not eat it no matter how hard they tried. Saliva sprayed out from their mouths as they attacked the Buddhist light with all their strength. All kinds of attacks that were completely different from the spells of Pangu world came one after another. Blood, rotten flesh, dirty blood, pus, all sorts of attacks were thrown out. The thin Buddhist light looked like it could shatter at any time, but it still firmly kept them out. Just as the stalemate was about to end, a greedy and brutal roar was heard. The bodies of over 1,000 fiend celestials froze at the same time. Carefully, they took a few steps back, vigilantly looking at the fiend celestials who were rushing towards them from the mountain path behind them. They were like rabbits who had heard the cry of an eagle. The fear that came from the depths of their souls made them subconsciously step aside. Suddenly, the fiend celestials on the mountain path were sent flying away while screaming. A strange fiend celestial, who was 10 miles tall, with a huge head that took up a third of his body, and a pair of arms that took up another third of his body, and his entire body was covered in countless pustules, crazily waved his fists and rushed towards them. All fiend celestials along the way were sent flying away by him, and those who were hit head-on by his fists were all smashed to pieces. Howling, he rushed to the front of the Buddhist light, then suddenly gave a weird laugh. Behind the Buddhist light, the Buddhas looked at the strange fiend celestial with vigilance. They secretly performed incantation gestures and injected the last bit of Buddhist power in their bodies into the Buddhist light. Instinctively, these Buddhas sensed the strangeness of this fiend celestial, that he had the ability to threaten their lives. The strange fiend celestial panted violently. Gnashing his teeth, he stared at the Buddhas behind the Buddhist light and murmured in a low voice, "Meat." The faces of the Buddhas were filled with anger. They were the top existences in the Buddhist League, except for those reclusive great virtues. But in the eyes of this fiend celestial, they were just a pile of meat to fill his stomach. In the middle of them, a Buddha, who stood about 18 feet tall, cried out in a low voice, "How dare you, you evil creature! Die now!" He raised his hand, and a crimson Buddhist light sprayed out. Amidst the light, a shadow that looked like a vajra could be vaguely seen flashing across. The Buddhist light sprinkled on the fiend celestial's body. A loud boom rang out, and the skin in the middle of the fiend celestial's forehead caved in by hundreds of feet. But, the skin bounced back, and there was no wound at all. Laughing strangely, the fiend celestial raised his arms, took a deep breath, and smashed them down at the Buddhist light with all his might. Time and space froze and everything froze in that instant. Only the two arms of the devil god were slowly smashing towards the treasured light released by the Buddha. But as time and space froze, the power of faith transmitted by countless Buddhist cultivators on the Great Vulture Mountain suddenly froze. Two disproportioned arms smashed heavily on the Treasure Light Mountain. Accompanied by a muffled boom, a hair-thin crack suddenly appeared on the thin Treasure Light Mountain. In about 1,000th of a second, the crack was repaired, and the frozen void was restored under the impact of a certain restrictive spell on the Great Vulture Mountain. But in such a short time, the gigantic fiend celestial had already seeped into the void through the tiny crack like water. Sticky and stinking pus sprayed out from the countless lumps on his body, spraying all over the faces and bodies of the Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, and Arhats. Miserable howls could be heard as the golden bodies of tens of thousands of Arhats melted, and the golden bodies of Bodhisattvas suddenly turned mottled. Even the Buddhas let out muffled groans as they felt an excruciating pain in their bodies. At this critical juncture, 3 shadows flashed across the sky. Taishur Demon, Desolate Emperor, and Bai Ling Ho flew past the entrance of the Great Vulture Mountain and struck out at the same time. 3 lightning beads of different colors, the size of a human head, smashed down at the same time. The 3 balls of lightning exploded without a sound. There was no fire, no sound, and no movement at all. However, the flow of the spirit veins in the first 3 mountains of Great Spirit Vulture Mountain suddenly slowed down. It was like magma that was about to condense, flowing at an extremely slow speed. Without the support of the spirit veins, all the restrictive spells on the 3 mountains 1,000 meters away from the Great Vulture Mountain crumbled at the same time. The restrictive spell that had been keeping countless fiend celestial away for such a long time suddenly disappeared. Those fiend celestial poured down like a broken dam. Almost with a crash, the 3 green mountains in front of Gridrakuta Mountain turned black. The fiend celestials charged into the monasteries, the Zen forests, and the cave abodes. They cheered as they chopped off the heads of the sons of Buddha, splitting up their bodies and devouring them. Although 80% of the sons of Buddha saw the opportunity and escaped to the 4 mountain peaks at the back, there were still 20% of the sons of Buddha who were massacred by the fiend celestial. Just like Taihuang Tsingtian, who had his southern heavenly gate breached, faint golden blood stained the 3 mountains. Heaven beyond heaven, in front of the Empress Hua Palace, the 7 patriarchs of Buddhism were shuddering in fear. However, no matter how they calculated, the chaotic heavenly secrets were unable to tell them anything useful. They did not know that their core grounds had been dyed red by the blood of their disciples. They did not know anything. Blood continued to flow as sorrowful wails rose into the sky from the great vulture mountain. Chapter 989. The battle cries of Gajrakuta mountain shook the sky and blood flowed like a river, but the 7 patriarchs of Buddhism in front of Empress Hua Palace were still ignorant. It was true that they had incredible magic power and infinite divine abilities, but now that the secrets of heaven had been messed up by the 7 Buddhist patriarchs, the 9 Tao patriarchs, and the 18 saints, none of them could calculate anything useful. The first 3 mountains of Gajrakuta mountain were breached, but the 7 patriarchs of Buddhism were still sitting in front of the gate of Empress Hua Palace, blocking the gate of Empress Hua Palace in a daze. However, their blood and chi were fluctuating, and they had a bad premonition that forced them to calculate with their fingers. After a few days of uneasiness, the 7 Buddhist patriarchs finally could not hold back the fear in their hearts and cast their Buddhist spells at the same time, looking around the world. However, the Empress Hua Palace suddenly emitted a dense 7-colored mist, which blocked the 7 Buddhist patriarchs' sight and prevented them from seeing anything thousands of miles away. Wahuang clan, are you trying to make things difficult for us? Shoshin said angrily. The landmass where the Empress Hua Palace was located was transformed from the mother body of the Wahuang clan, which was born in the chaos. The whole landmass and the Empress Hua Palace were one, and had long been refined by the Wahuang clan into a spiritual treasure. However, the Wahuang clan did not like to fight with others, and this spiritual treasure was only a purely defensive treasure. Otherwise, the 7 Buddhist patriarchs would not have dared to block the gate of Empress Hua Palace. But now, the 7 Buddhist patriarchs were constantly alarmed. They wanted to cast their divine powers to inspect the world, but the Wahuang clan had interfered, which made them a bit helpless. Shoshin scolded angrily, but the Wahuang clan did not pay any attention to him, and the 7-colored clouds kept gushing out. Shoshin was extremely angry. He slowly rose to his feet and suddenly transformed into a beam of golden light, flying toward the outside of the Empress Hua Palace. With Empress Hua's mighty power and the defensive restrictions covering the entirety of outer heaven, Shoshin wouldn't be able to see what was going on in the outside world under the cover of the rainbow clouds, unless he wanted to shed all pretense of cordiality and fight Empress Hua. With a trace of anger, Guarding Heart took a step out of the sky beyond heaven, where Emperor Hua's palace was located. Only in this place could his Dharma eyes not be disturbed by the colorful clouds. In a blink of an eye, his Dharma eyes could illuminate the entire universe, allowing him to see clearly what was happening in the universe. All beings in Pan-Gu world who were above the level of Sky Immortal instantly sensed something strange, as if a pair of enormous eyes had been looking down at them. This strange feeling disappeared in a flash. Shoshin, who was at the edge of the sky beyond heavens, had already angrily chanted the name of Buddha. The southern heavenly gate had collapsed, and countless fiend gods from outer domains were scrambling for the corpses and flesh of the unlucky sky immortals of Grand Sovereign Huang Xingtian. The 3 mountains in front of Gajrakuta mountain were flooded with blood. Someone had blocked the flow of the energy veins in the 3 mountains with a great divine power, and the powerful protective formation was broken by countless fiend gods before it could do anything. The blood of the Buddhist disciples dyed the 3 mountains red, and the miserable scene made Shoshin's heart bleed. The Buddhist disciples who could enter Gajrakuta mountain were all people who had a profound foundation and great affinity with Buddha. Many of them were Buddhist seeds who had reincarnated thousands of times, and had been monks for generations. Every one of them had a great possibility of becoming a Buddha in the future. For Shoshin and the others, who were dedicated to the glory of Buddhism, the death of any disciple on Gajrakuta mountain was an unbearable loss. Nuwa! Shoshin roared. He no longer called the Wahuang clan by her title, but by her nickname. Buddha was enraged. At this moment, A red Buddhist flame burst out from the top of Shoshin's head, burning through the void of heaven beyond, revealing the chaos inside. Dozens of beams of golden light suddenly darted over at high speed. Dozens of monks, whose heads were bleeding or arms or legs were broken, fell at Guarding Heart's feet in a sorry state. A bodhisattva, whose body was covered in glowing jewels, but his chest and abdomen had been heavily slashed, revealing his colorful internal organs, cried out hoarsely, "Patriarch, quickly go and save Gridrakuta mountain. The disciples can't hold on any longer." Shoshin trembled with anger and shouted, "Are you here to deliver the news? Why are you only here now?" 2 streams of hot tears flowed down the bodhisattva's face as he cried out, "Patriarch, we can't get close to heaven beyond. Once we do, we immediately lose our way. We have mistakenly entered the chaos a few times, and many of our senior brothers were killed by natural hazards in the chaos, leaving nothing behind." Guardian Heart was stunned. His eyes widened in anger, and rays of Buddhist light shot out. Instantly, the void trembled, and a few young girls with seductive figures suddenly transformed into petite and adorable beehives. They flapped their wings and rapidly flew into the sky beyond the heavens. A sheet of colorful mist swept over, and the bee tigers disappeared without a trace. Apparently, they had been brought into Empress Wa's palace by the Wahwang clan. Shoshin's Dharma eyes were very powerful. Before the girls turned into bee tigers and fled, he saw the leading girl, who was a peak stage primordial immortal, carrying a large flag that glowed with a bright light. In the middle of the flag was an ancient demon rune that emanated a mysterious aura, and the images of countless mountains, rivers, and demons could be vaguely seen in the light. Shoshin knew that this was a supreme treasure of Primal, the myriad spirit flag, which the Wahwang clan obtained from the chaos. It had the powerful effect of deterring all demons, ghosts, spirits, and otherworldly items. At the same time, it also had the power to confuse and disturb the void. Obviously, this group of young girls who had cultivated into beehive tigers had used the myriad spirit flag to isolate the communication between the sky beyond heavens and the outside world. They had used the myriad spirit flag to send the Buddhist disciples who had come from the great spirit vulture mountain to beg their patriarch to save their lives to suffer in the chaos world. It was obvious that the Wahwang clan had secretly activated the restrictive power of Empress Wa's palace to cut off heaven beyond when the fiend gods from the outworld attacked Mount Grizzly Vulture. Otherwise, the 7 Buddhist patriarchs would not have been so slow to realize that so many of their disciples and grand disciples had been killed. Shoshin was so angry that his limbs were trembling. He suddenly recalled the warning that the Wahwang clan had given him. It could not be any more accurate. A woman's heart was the most vicious. The Wahwang clan's plan was closely followed by the other, one closely interlocking with the other, leaving no loopholes. Shoshin and the rest had suffered a great loss. Mount Grizzly Vulture was the foundation of the Buddhist League. If the Mount Grizzly Vulture was really breached by the fiend gods from the outworld, the 7 Buddhist patriarchs could forget about bringing glory to the Buddhist League. Even now, if the fiend gods from the outworld took another step on the first 3 mountains of Mount Grizzly Vulture, it was equivalent to giving the 7 Buddhist patriarchs a tight slap to their faces. Now, they were slapping the faces of the 7 Buddhist patriarchs so hard that Shoshin felt as if his internal organs were burning, as if there was boiling oil inside him. Nyua! Shoshin roared into the sky once again. He roared like a Vajra lion and rushed back to heaven beyond. The colorful mist spreading out from Empress Wa Palace gradually dispersed, and the cold voice of the Wahwang clan was heard, with a hint of inexplicable charm. Shoshin, what are you shouting for? You blocked the gate of Emperor Nwa's palace and forbade me to go out. I've already tolerated it. But you even yelled and disturbed the peace of Emperor Nwa's palace. Don't go too far. Shoshin raised his right hand and cast a Buddhist palm incantation down toward Empress Wa Palace. The sound of chanting filled the air, and a strong scent of sandalwood wafted in the air. A huge hand, measuring 10,000 miles in circumference, which looked like it was carved out of pure gold and was emitting a bright white gleam, appeared in the sky and smashed down toward Empress Wa Palace. Prince Changqin broke the void with the mirror of Kunlun, cried Shoshin. He led the fiend gods from outer domains to invade Pangu world and slaughter the disciples of the Buddhist League. Yet, you say I'm going too far. A beam of red light shot up into the sky from Emperor Nvua's palace. The Buddha's palm shattered the red light inch by inch, then slowly pressed down. However, the golden glow of the Buddhist palm was gradually worn away and dimmed. Finally, when it was about to press down on Empress Hua Palace, a new beam of red light rushed out and shattered the Buddhist palm. From this, it could be seen that the cultivation base of the Huang clan was indeed much weaker than that of Shoshin. A casual palm strike from Shoshin required 2 consecutive strikes from the Huang clan with the help of Empress Hua Palace, a defensive spirit artifact, to neutralize it. The cold voice of the Huang clan rang out slowly, Shoshin, since your name is Shoshin, you should ask your conscience. Were you the one who plotted against the human race, blocked the gate of Empress Hua Palace and bullied me, or were you the one who summoned the fiend gods from outer domains to kill your disciples? The other 6 patriarchs, who were sitting cross-legged in front of Empress Hua Palace, slowly rose to their feet and said in a cold voice, "It's just that you were too cruel." The Huang clan laughed coldly and said with a faint sigh, "A monk can do it, but I can't. His actions were too vicious. What is your plan? If your plan comes true, will the human race still be the human race? You want to raise the humans under my protection like pigs and dogs? What do you think of me?" The 7 Buddhas were silent for a long time. Then, Shoshin said coldly, "I'm not going to argue with a woman like you today. My junior brothers, let's go back to the Great Vulture Mountain and kill all those fiend gods first, then we'll come back to seek justice." With a cold snort, the 7 Buddhas were about to leave, but the Huang clan laughed and said, "Justice? Justice is in the hearts of the people, and it's not something you Buddhas can say. You want justice? I'm going to seek justice from you today. If you want to save the Great Vulture Mountain, you'll have to be a genius beyond the heavens." 2 mighty and unparalleled auras rose into the sky, followed by a beam of spiritual light. With the 4-legged square cauldron above the Huang clan's head, the Yellow Emperor Xianyuan and the Yen Emperor Shenong on her left and right, the 3 of them rushed straight out of the Empress Hua Palace. The Yellow Emperor Xianyuan and the Yen Emperor Shenong were in high spirits, and the auras around them were rolling like dragons. The billowing purple aura mixed with the endless chi of merit surrounded them, and the aura made the 7 Buddhas exclaim in unison. The Yellow Emperor Xianyuan and the Yen Emperor Shenong had already successfully fused with the Tao, and stepped into the ranks of the top existences in the Pangu world, achieving immortality and indestructibility. What made people even more helpless was that, just like the Huang clan, they fused with the immeasurable virtue and the immeasurable psyche power of the human race, and they formed the golden body of merit. This made the 7 Buddhas so angry that their claws were numb, but they dared not to really attack them. The golden body of merit was protected by the heavenly Tao, and whoever dared to touch them might be immediately punished by the heavenly Tao. Even figures like the 7 Buddhas were not willing to fight recklessly. If the golden body of merit was not such a cheat-like existence, how could the 7 Buddhas gather their strength to stop the Huang clan? With their cultivation, 2 of them could suppress the Huang clan and make her unable to move. Because they did not dare to attack the golden body of virtues recklessly, the 7 Buddhas could only envelop the entire palace of Emperor Nvuo with their enormous willpower and block the exit of the palace of Emperor Nvuo by taking a beating. That was why the little maids of the Empress Hua Palace dared to take turns to fight the 7 Buddhas. The Huang clan looked coldly at the 7 Buddhas, who were speechless, and said softly, "I told you, you won't be able to walk out of the human realm beyond heaven easily." 5 figures flashed out of the air, and a deep and hoarse voice slowly sounded. "Monk, we all think that the human race is still better than the human race." Chapter 990. He was Taoist Crimson, one of Taoist Long-Browed's 3 first disciples. His cultivation base had reached the first tier of the Tao-breaking realm, and he was kind and warm-hearted. He had an excellent reputation in the Tao League. The 9 Daozus sat cross-legged around the list, their faces solemn. More than 90% of their divine sense was immersed in it. Ever since Pangu created the world and the 9 patriarchs of the Tao League fused with the Tao, the general trend of Pangu world had been planned, plotted, and driven by them. The chaos fiend gods falling like rain was something that they could easily calculate. The 33 heavens shook, and suddenly, Taoist Long-Browed's furious roar rang out from within the Daoyu Ocean. Above the 33 heavens was the supreme Daoyu Ocean. Once these souls were conferred as gods, the entire Pangu world would fall into the hands of the Tao League. But this time, they were going to become gods in Pangu world, and the vast Pangu continent needed a powerful artifact that could control and monitor the entire Pangu world to refine the investiture of gods. Therefore, the 9 Daozu had joined hands and refined the supreme treasure of primal used by the celestial court to monitor Pangu continent into the investiture of gods, which was also the ultimate version of the countless investiture of gods. There were 36 entrances to the Taoist palace, and each entrance had 9 palaces from left to right. Starting from the first hall, the further back one went, the taller the hall in the middle became. The last hall in the middle of the Taoist palace was more like a tower than a hall. The 36 halls corresponded to the 36 heavens of the Taoist sect. There were many doors on each level of the hall, and in front of each door stood a giant golden-armored heavenly general. But with 90% of his divine soul fused with the investiture of gods, he could not act rashly in a hurry. After pondering for a long time, the Taoist suddenly reached out a hand and made a grabbing motion. The bronze sword-breaker he used to fight great horns last time glowed faintly and fell into his hand. And this time, they had the entire human race in their calculations. Once they succeeded, Pangu world would be in their hands. Even if the 7 patriarchs of the Buddhist League got some benefits, it would not hurt the general trend. By then, the destiny of the entire human race would be seized by the Tao sect, the power of the entire world would be used by the Tao sect, and the 9 ancestral patriarchs would be able to transcend mortality and attain sainthood. The slightest mistake in one's mind during artifact forging would result in failure, not to mention that they were forging a grand mist artifact. Tao Integration Realm. What would the Tao Integration Realm amount to then? To be honest, the Daozu were also a little uneasy about the investiture of the gods in their hands. Thus, every soul was carefully selected, and every soul was extremely important. How could they allow them to do as they pleased within the divine seal decree and devour each other? The 9 Daozu were preparing the souls for apotheosis. They were not the natal fiend gods that the immortals of the fiendish Tao kept in their magic treasures, nor did they keep the natal poison goo. They could not let these souls devour each other. There was not the slightest sound in the vast Tao palace. Immortals dressed in Taoist robes sat in groups of 3 to 5 in each of the palaces. They were either quietly cultivating, reciting scriptures, or concocting elixirs and weapons. Everyone had their own things to do, but no one dared to make any noise. The souls that were sucked into the divine seal decree kept clamoring to devour each other, and kept clamoring to refine and control the entire investiture of the gods, which greatly weakened the power of the divine seal decree and prevented it from monitoring the deaths and injuries of all living beings on Pangu continent normally. Suddenly, the Wahuang clan released the fiend gods from the outer domains into Pangu world. Countless fiend gods rushed into the 33 heavens, and even the southern heaven gate was knocked away. With the overall strength of the 9 Daozu, they immediately discovered what was happening in the celestial court, and were ready to fight back for their disciples and grand disciples. The 18 saints were all idlers, and it was easy for them to defeat them one by one. Moreover, the Wahuang clan was all alone. Although she had a golden body of virtue that was extremely difficult to provoke, she was, after all, a woman. Since the creation of the human race, she had been staying in the Empress Hua Palace all year round. Even the apocalypse of heaven and earth could not touch the palace. It was as if she was raising all kinds of divine beasts and fowls for fun. As for the 7 patriarchs of the Buddhist League, they were a little restless and wanted to replace the Tao League at any time. However, their power was limited, and when their cultivation bases were about the same, the 9 Daozu of the Tao League had firmly suppressed them. Therefore, whether it was the apocalypse of heaven and earth, or the countless intrigues and schemes, the 7 Buddhist patriarchs of the Buddhist League had always appeared as natural allies of the patriarchs of the Tao League. The investiture of the gods, which was used to monitor Pangu continent and absorb souls to prepare for investiture, had lost most of its power. How could the nine Daozu accept that? However, the investiture of the gods used in all the investiture of gods in the mortal world was a temporary substitute with lesser power. After all, how big was the earth? How small was the territory of the Shang dynasty? There were only about 300 so-called celestial lords. So, why would they need a powerful investiture of the gods? Perhaps, as Wu Qi had expected, the nine Daozu had been busy comprehending the heavenly secrets and improving their cultivation bases all year round. They had been running around and plotting against this and that, and they had been busy with endless tasks. Therefore, in addition to their formidable overall strength, their level of artifact refinement was not that great. This was the Palace of Dao Origin. As the name suggested, it was the origin of the Dao League in Pangu world. Just like the Great Vulture Mountain, those who could cultivate in this palace were the most important figures in the Dao League. Not to mention others, even the 6 heavens and earths of the celestial court were ranked last in the Palace of Dao Origin. One could imagine how many wonderful figures of the Dao League were hiding in this palace. However, the investiture of the gods was crafted by the 9 of them together. If they wanted to control it, they had to inject their divine souls into the investiture of the gods at the same time. This was simply a trap that he had woven for himself, and he was tightly trapped in it. However, for the great plan of controlling Pangu world, for the sake of saving their faces, the 9 Daozu had no choice but to swallow the pain and inject 90% of their divine souls into the investiture of the gods to control this strange chaos treasure. A priest with white hair and a white beard, who had a kind face and was wrapped in a clear mist, slowly stood up. The god investiture of the gods had been practiced countless times in the mortal world, and every time, the result was good. The earth, where Wu Qi was born, had also practiced the god investiture of the gods at the turn of the Shang and Zhou dynasties. That time, the long-browed Daozu had even split his primordial spirit to direct the god investiture of the gods himself, and perfectly completed that great plan. That was the last god investiture of the Dao League and the Buddhism League in the mortal world. However, the 9 Daozu were not powerful enough, so they joined hands to forge the god investiture of the gods together. As a result, they succeeded in making the investiture of the gods. However, this god investiture of the gods had quite a lot of flaws. After all, the 9 Daozu worked together. Even though they had lived together for countless years and were almost telepathically connected, they couldn't keep their minds perfectly when forging the god investiture of the gods. This god investiture of the gods was the greatest weapon that the 9 Daozu of Dao used to trap the humankind this time. Originally, all the external conditions were within their calculations, and there were no loopholes. However, the biggest loophole was precisely the 9 patriarchs of Dao sect themselves. The Palace of Dao Origin was entirely cyan gray, like a volcano, containing an inexhaustible heat. It could erupt at any time, and shake the entire Pangu world. The key to opening this volcano were the 9 Daozu. Everything in the Palace of Dao Origin was under their control. It could even be said that before today, the entire Pangu world was under the control of the 9 Daozu. Because of the greatly weakened power of the god investiture, Wu Qi was severely injured by the counterforce when he destroyed a soul for the first time, but remained unharmed after that. Of course, Wu Qi had isolated the aura with the fiend-slaying sword formation, but it also had something to do with the greatly weakened power of the god investiture. In the last courtyard of the Palace of Dao Origin, on the top floor of the tallest hall, a golden light enveloped the entire hall. Within the golden light was a vibrating purple god investiture. A large number of figures were faintly visible on the god investiture, while countless twisted characters flashed down from the god investiture from time to time. These characters seemed to be human names, with the names of some stars vaguely marked behind them. Qi Cheng, take the god-whipping whip and kill all those evil creatures, said the long-browed Daoist with a cold grin. They have invaded Pangu world, but they have delivered themselves to us. Choose those with stronger cultivation bases and kill as many as you can, so that you can accumulate some virtues. When the god investiture absorbed the first soul, the soul of Lord Baoang, the crown prince of the celestial court, who was killed by Wu Qi as a sacrifice, it began to change. The soul that was sucked into the god investiture almost instinctively wanted to control and occupy the god investiture, and as the god investiture kept sucking in more souls from Pangu continent, the competition inside reached a fever pitch that could make anyone collapse. Not to mention that they were allowed to occupy the god investiture. If this were to get out, it would be a joke, and the 9 Daozu could not afford to lose face like this. Above the boundless purple mist, a simple and heavy Dao palace was steadily carried on the backs of 4 sacred beasts. The azure dragon in the east, the vermilion bird in the south, the white tiger in the west, and the black tortoise in the north, all 4 sacred beasts were about 1,000 miles long, and a vast light was radiating from their backs, which turned into a thick light wheel, on which stood the Dao palace. Especially this time, they were working together to refine a supreme artifact of primal, which they were going to turn into the ultimate version of the god investiture, which would have all kinds of unimaginable functions. It was an extremely huge project, and if any step went wrong, there would be unpredictable changes. So, when Lord Baoang's soul began to refine the god investiture, one of the Daozu immediately stopped him with great magic power. But the good times did not last long. More and more souls entered the god investiture. While devouring each other, they racked their brains to try to occupy the god investiture, which drove the Daozu crazy. Now, the god investiture had stored the souls of hundreds of thousands of people. Only a few of them had the fate to be conferred as celestial lords, but the others were also very important candidates. They would be conferred as mountain gods and water gods of the mountains and rivers of Pangu continent, as well as city gods and land gods of the various cities. This system of clergy had been practiced by the celestial court for countless years in the mortal world, and it had long been proven to be a mature, reliable, strict, and highly controllable system. After receiving the whip with both hands, Daoist Scarlet bowed to Daoist Long Eyebrows, then transformed into a beam of light and flew out of the palace of Dao Origin. Not to mention the importance of the god investiture to their overall plan, just this matter alone would make them lose face. Therefore, the 9 Daozu could only pour their enormous divine souls into the god investiture to deter the countless souls in it and prevent them from devouring and fighting at will. The other was to activate the power of the god investiture so that it could exert its strongest power to monitor the entire Pangu continent. That was where the flaw lay. Standing outside the Daoyuotian palace, Daoist Scarlet wielded the whip with all his might and lashed it out. A loud rumble rang out, and the cries of the 6 celestial emperors rang through the heaven and earth. A beam of light descended from the sky and shattered more than 70% of all the immortal spells and restrictive spells in the 33 heavens. Chapter 991. Daoist Crimson's whip broke 70% of the restrictions, and the 33 heavens fell into a deathly silence. Not to mention the 6 celestial emperors, countless celestial lords, heavenly officials, spirit officials, immortal monarchs, heavenly lords, heavenly generals, heavenly kings, and other high-level members of the heavenly court, not to mention the long-eyebrowed Daoist, whose face was ashen and whose aura was extremely chaotic. Even the fiend gods from the outer domain were staring blankly at the 33 heavens that had become a thoroughfare. The 33 heavens were very difficult to attack. Just the southern heavenly gate alone was enough to hold off the fiend celestials of the other realms for a long time. Not to mention the higher the sky, the more powerful the restrictive immortal spells became. There were all kinds of soul-destroying immortal light, soul-destroying immortal light, annihilating magnetic light, and other vicious things. Even the fiend celestials of the other realms, whose cultivation had reached the Dao-breaking realm, would be peeled off several layers of their skin when they encountered these powerful immortal spells. Just Sovereign Huang Zhengtian alone had killed so many immortals that their blood flowed like a river, and the terrifying restrictions had also killed 3 times the number of celestial gods that had perished in battle. Fighting on their home ground gave them an absolute advantage, not to mention that their home ground was called the 33 heavens. However, Daoist Crimson's whip was similar to the investiture of the gods, which was made by the 9 Daozu using a primordial treasure. This deity-striking whip was different from the legendary deity-striking whip used by Jiang Xia in the War of Deification that took place at the turn of the Shang and Zhou dynasties on Earth in the mortal world. This was a genuine deity-striking whip that took 9 Taoist ancestors several eons of hard work to refine. Its lethality was extremely tyrannical. No matter if it was a saint, immortal, fiend, mortal, demon, or ghost, it only needed a light lash to shatter them. The 9 great Tao patriarchs had worked together to create the treasure, and Taoist crimson was at the peak of the Tao-breaking level. The restrictive spells of the 33 heavens had been set up by previous celestial emperors, and among the thousands of celestial emperors, only a handful had reached the Tao-breaking level. That was why Taoist crimson's whip had almost shattered the 33 heavens. The celestial gods looked down at the countless celestial gods of the 33 heavens, their faces pale. The fiend celestials of the other realms drooled as they looked at the countless immortals in the 33 heavens. All of a sudden, a loud rumble rang out. Thousands of fiend gods from outer domains, who were forced to shrink their bodies to the size of ordinary humans, laughed wildly as they expanded their bodies to thousands of miles tall. With every step they took, they crossed thousands of miles and quickly rushed past Grand Emperor Huang Zhengtian, leading countless fiend gods to charge even higher into the sky. Along the way, all the advisors of the celestial court who dared to stop them were smashed to pieces by these fiend gods. Whether they were heaven immortals, gold immortals, or primordial immortals, they were as weak as tofu in front of these leaders. On the surface, there were no more than 100 primordial immortals in the entire celestial court. Faced with thousands of fiend gods who were in the realm of Tao breaking and the realm of Tao reasoning, the celestial court was almost defenseless after losing the restrictions of the 33 heavens. In just the time to finish a pot of tea, 26 layers of the 33 heavens had been breached. From Tai Huang Huangzheng heaven to Yuan Tong Yuan heaven, the 26 heavenly realms, which were shrouded in bright light and drifting clouds, were quickly occupied by the fiend's celestial fiend from outer domains. It was as if ink was being poured into a puddle of clear water. The number of fiend's celestial fiend from outer domains grew larger and larger, and their harsh, unpleasant cries made one's eardrums ache. Crimson. Taoist long eyebrows' roar shook the entire 33 heavens. Smiling faintly, Taoist Crimson held the god-slaying whip with both hands and bowed deeply in the direction of the Taoyuan palace. Master, would you believe me if I told you that my whip missed? At this time, Taoist Crimson, who had always been steady and kind, was in the mood to make a witty remark, and his voice was filled with an indescribable vitality and enthusiasm. This strange thing made the hearts of everyone who heard Taoist Crimson skip a beat, and a chill ran up from the soles of their feet. Not to mention the 6 celestial emperors, even the 9 Daozu froze, as if something extremely frightening was happening. Large sheets of immortal light sprinkled down from the Daoyu Ocean Palace, rapidly repairing the restrictions of the 33 heavens. At last, the 9 Daozu had struck out in person. But as more than 90% of their divine souls were tied up by the investiture of the gods, the power of the various restrictions they had set up in the sky was limited, and could only block the attacks of those celestial fiend celestials from outer domains below the realm of primordial. The leaders of the stronger celestial fiend celestials could still come and go with great difficulty, braving thunderbolts and flames to kill all the immortals they saw, greedily devouring everything they had. But, after all, the investiture of the gods was close at hand. While the flesh and blood of the immortals were devoured, their immortal souls were still sucked into the investiture of the gods. But, this was not what the 9 Daozu wanted to see. They were going to absorb the souls of the heroes of the human race who had died on Pangu continent, or the souls of the mountain spirits and water monsters, and confer them the title of celestial lords. So, what was the point of absorbing the immortal souls of countless immortals who had become the subjects of the celestial court? Originally, immortals had the hope of making continuous progress, but once they were conferred the title of Celestial Lord, their fleshly bodies would be imprisoned by the natal star power of the stars, and it would be difficult for them to make any further progress in the future. How cruel was this for an immortal? How could they be willing to be conferred the title of Celestial Lord? On top of that, the investiture of the gods had only absorbed a wisp of the true spirit in their immortal souls, and more than 90% of their power had dissipated. So, even if they were possessed, they would have to cultivate for many years to regain their cultivation base and magic power. And, Where could they find so many bodies with excellent aptitudes to possess? If they were reincarnated, who knew what they would become after that? Not to mention that the Buddhist League was restless now, the Shizo dynasty was still entangled with the Ling dynasty on Panga continent, and the Buddhist League had planted countless spies in the 6 paths of reincarnation. Perhaps, more than 90% of the immortals of the celestial court would have to enter the beast realm after reincarnation on a large scale. After considering all kinds of possibilities, the 9 Daozu were stunned to find that Scarlet's whip had given them a great, almost unsolvable problem. The 26 heavens had almost collapsed, and so many immortals and immortal officials had been lost. They were the elites of the Dao League who had spent countless efforts and time to gather since the current great celestial emperor Ziwei Lingying ascended to the throne. The whip had basically returned the celestial court to the miserable state it was in at the end of the last apocalypse of heaven and earth. The loss was too heavy. Beams of immortal light kept sprinkling down, quickly repairing the immortal magic and restrictive spells of the 33 heavens. Suddenly, a beam of light fell from above and enveloped Scarlet, who did not resist and let the light suck him back into the palace of Dao origin. In front of the 9 Dao ancestors, Crimson Taoist respectfully returned the god-striking whip to Long Eyebrow Taoist. He cupped his hands and bowed respectfully to Long Eyebrow Taoist. Dao Ancestor, the fruit of today is the cause of the past. I hope Dao Ancestor will forgive me for my disobedience today. Long Eyebrow Taoist took a deep breath. Instead of calling him Master, he called himself Daozu. What was wrong with Scarlet Taoist? His body trembled as he looked at Daoist Crimson. This was one of the 3 prime disciples whom he had painstakingly cultivated and protected over countless eons, allowing him to avoid countless apocalypses of heaven and earth. The Taishang was emotionless, but who could truly be emotionless? Looking at Scarlet Taoist, the long-eyebrowed Taoist felt a sharp pain in his heart, as if someone had torn a bloody wound in it. The long eyebrows Daoist laughed dryly, gritted his teeth, and said, "Qi Cheng. You. Gu Chen. Ha, Gu Chen, you call yourself Gu Chen." Looking up at the sky, the long-eyebrowed Taoist tried hard to find the impression of this name in his long-forgotten memory. Crimson Taoist straightened his body and nodded slowly. With a relaxed and relieved smile, Akashiro sighed and said, "Yes, Daozu, do you still remember that fisherman Gu Chen on the bank of the Chushui River?" Daozu said that Gu Chen was destined to become an immortal, and disregarding Gu Chen's wish, he forcibly took Gu Chen as his disciple. The long-eyebrowed Taoist's face turned pale. Trembling, he stared at Scarlet Taoist and said, "Fisherman Gu Chen. You are already an immortal, so why do you still remember what happened back then?" "Fisherman Gu Chen, hee, after all these years, how have I treated you?" You, Fisherman Gu Chen. Good. Looking at the long-eyebrowed Taoist, Scarlet Taoist sighed and said, "It's true that immortals are free and unfettered, and live a long life, but Gu Chen does not want to be an immortal. He only wants to be a human being." Sighing softly, Scarlet Taoist continued in an intoxicated manner, "Master, junior brothers, you have been immersed in the boundless heavenly Tao day and night, calling yourselves the Taishang and emotionless immortal. You have been meditating in the palace of Tao origin or in the outer heaven immortal mountain, just to improve your cultivation base, magic power, divine soul, and everything that can be improved. You have no parents, no wife, and no children, standing high above the masses, regarding all living beings as ants." With a sigh, Scarlet Taoist looked up at the ceiling and said in a low voice, "And I still remember my wife, my son, my dog, and my boat on the river of Chu. When I woke up in the morning, I caught a fat fish, filled a pot of water with water, and stewed a pot of fish soup. I watched the morning mist dissipate, watched the morning glow rise, watched my wife and children play, and the yellow dog howl happily. How happy was that?" The faces of the 9 Daozu darkened as they stared at Scarlet Taoist as if they had just seen a ghost. What Scarlet Taoist said had completely overturned something in them, and at the same time, aroused some of the deepest fear in their hearts. Glancing around, he glanced at the 9 Daozu, then at the dozens of Daozu's premier disciples, over 200 true disciples, and nearly 1,000 personal disciples who had rushed here after hearing the news. Scarlet Taoist chuckled and said, "We regard all living beings as ants." Yes, ants have a short lifespan. In the time we spend in seclusion, perhaps the human emperors of Pangu continent will change 3 to 5 generations. We stand high above the masses, and with a casual strike, we can turn thousands of cities into dust. We have countless disciples, and second junior brother, I reckon that you have nearly 100 ancestral masters who founded your sect, and countless disciples and grand disciples, right? A black-bearded Taoist nodded silently, his expression strange as he looked at Scarlet Taoist. Scarlet Taoist nodded and said, "Yes, we have countless disciples and grand disciples, and we even have disciples who have broken through to the realm of Tao breaking. Primordial immortals are our grand disciples, and gold immortals are our grand disciples. With a single order, the 9 heavens will tremble, and the outer heavenly realms and even Pangu continent will be shaken by our thunderbolts and flames." With a wry smile, Scarlet Taoist shook his head and said, "We stand high above the masses and regard all living beings as ants. But, putting aside the 9 Daozu, do you still remember the pain, sorrow, and joy you experienced when you were ants? Do you still remember the flowers in spring, the green grass in summer, the golden wind in autumn, and the white snow in winter? Do you still remember all the flavors? Do you still remember your parents when you were human? Do you still remember your relatives when you were human? Do you still remember your old friends when you were human? What are you trying to do?" Taoist long brows interrupted Scarlet Taoist. Looking at him, Scarlet Taoist sighed and said, "I don't want to be an immortal, but a human." After a long silence, Taoist long brows clenched his jaw and asked word by word, "How many people like you are there in Tao League?" Scarlet Taoist smiled and said softly, "You'll have to ask Goddess Nuwa about that." There was a dead silence in the palace of Tao Origin. The faces of the 9 Daozu were ashen. Chapter 992. The eldest Daozu looked at each other for a long while, then slowly glanced across all the first disciples, true disciples, and direct disciples in the hall. Over 1,000 top-grade powerful beings in Pangu world had their mouths, noses, and hearts fixed on their faces, remaining motionless like wooden statues. They were all devout warriors with great Tao, and seemed to be the true disciples of the 9 Daozu, loyal and courageous. However, Scarlet Priest, one of the 27 top first disciples of the 9 Daozu, was also standing here. He remained motionless, with a faint smile on his face, as if he was still the filial disciple and true disciple of Long Eyebrow Priest. Abruptly, a gust of wind rose from the hall. A visible cyan gust of wind surrounded Scarlet Priest and disabled him from moving. Long Eyebrow Priest let out a long breath and said blandly, "Go to the Empress Wa Palace and curse the Wahuang clan for 10 minutes. Give up those strange thoughts in your head, and you will still be my best disciple." Scarlet Priest could not move. He only smiled and said, "Daozu is joking." Long-Eyebrowed Taoist quietly looked at Scarlet Taoist, and Scarlet Taoist also quietly looked at him. Both of their eyes seemed to be surrounded by nebulas, sparkling with mysterious light spots, each containing the endless mysteries of the world. After a whole 2 hours, Long Eyebrow Priest said in a low voice, "You have always been my best disciple. I believe that the next one who confuse with Tao will either be Reverend Qiyang, the eldest disciple of your uncle White Eyebrow, or you." When Long Eyebrow Priest said this, his mouth corners were trembling. His heart, which had been as still as a rock and a dead tree for countless years, was aching, and even his voice was trembling. For Tao integration stage cultivators, it was virtually impossible for them to affect their mental states. But this time, because of Scarlet Priest's betrayal, let's call it a betrayal, Long Eyebrow Priest was deeply hurt. Scarlet Priest failed to get any response from Long Eyebrow Priest. He just smiled, looked at Long Eyebrow Priest, and slowly nodded. Long Eyebrow Taoist was silent for a long time again. Then, he gritted his teeth and said, "To be immortal and to be free and unfettered, what's wrong with being an immortal? The human race is like a bunch of ants, born in the morning and extinguished in the evening. They can't even control their own fate, so what's so good about being human?" Scarlet Taoist finally spoke. He chuckled and said, "If he is not a good person, why does Daozu want to control the human race? The long-eyebrowed Taoist was speechless. He looked at his 8 brothers in embarrassment. The 9 Daozu were silent at the same time. They couldn't answer the question from the perspective of their hearts. Yes, if the human race was really as insignificant as an ant, then why did Taoism and Buddhism try so hard to divide and control the human race? Wasn't it because the human race wasn't so insignificant and weak? In the current Taoism and Buddhism, apart from the 9 Daozu and the 7 Gautama Buddhas who were born as chaos fiend gods, apart from some of the powerful people who were not from the human race, more than 95% of the Taoists and monks were born as humans. Not to mention the Taoists, they could immediately ascend to become immortals and live a long life after obtaining the fate of immortality. But what about the monks? The monks used the power of faith and faith as the foundation to prove their Tao, and they often made great aspirations to help themselves achieve the Tao. Therefore, the monks could cultivate faster than the Taoists, but they had to pay a greater price. Many Gautama Buddhas had to go through tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, or even millions of reincarnations in the human race before they finally became Buddhas. Whether it was immortals or Gautama Buddhas, they could never cut off the inextricable connection with the human race. No matter how much they despised the weak, and uncivilized human race, even if the heavenly Tao didn't recognize them as part of the human race, they were still humans, after all. Just like a big tree laughing at the insignificance of a small seed, the long-eyebrowed Taoist said that the human race was insignificant, but it was actually a criticism. What he was criticizing was not other people's hearts, but his own. However, Scarlet Taoist's rhetorical question made the 9 Daozu speechless. After another long silence, the long-eyebrowed Taoist sighed and said in a low voice, "What a criticism." He smiled bitterly for a long time, then asked Scarlet Taoist curiously, "Did the Huahuang clan find you only after you became my disciple?" Scarlet Taoist looked at the long-eyebrowed Taoist with a deep nostalgia in his eyes. After pondering for a long time, Scarlet Taoist said in a low voice, "Do you remember that when Daozu forcibly recruited the fisherman Gu Chen as his disciple, the world was still ruled by the sacred emperor of the human race, Zhuanqiu? Before Daozu met the fisherman Gu Chen, Emperor Zhuanqiu had visited Gu Chen in person." Scarlet Taoist took a deep breath. His tone became very excited, and his face was flushed. At that time, the human race was so prosperous, and Pangu continent was so vast, and Gu Chen was just a commoner under the rule of the human emperor. But the sacred emperor Zhuanqiu personally visited Gu Chen and bowed 3 times, begging Gu Chen to always remember that he was a human if he became Daozu's disciple, for the sake of the destiny of the human race. Not an immortal. Scarlet Taoist's face twitched. He performed a Taiji incantation gesture with both hands and performed a series of hand incantation gestures, almost frantically calculating something. After a long time, he snapped, "Nonsense. With Zhuanqiu's cultivation base, how could he know that I'm going to take you as my disciple?" Scarlet Taoist smiled brightly as he nodded and said, "What was Sacred Emperor Zhuanqiu's cultivation base at that time? About the same as an ordinary heaven immortal. He really didn't know that Daozu was going to take Gu Chen as his disciple. He was just paying a visit to the fisherman Gu Chen at the Holy Mother's order." With a ruddy face, Scarlet Taoist snapped, "As the sacred Emperor Zhuanqiu, he personally visited an ordinary commoner 3 times just for the sake of the destiny of the human race. I, Gu Chen, am only an ant-like human being, but I will never dare to forget this kindness for the rest of my life." Pointing his finger at the 9 Daozu, Scarlet Taoist sneered and said, "You stand high above the masses, treating all living beings in the world like dogs. You don't even have a trace of humanity. You forcibly took me as your disciple and severed the love between my husband and my son. How cruel is that? The Holy Mother of the human race, the 3 emperors, and the 5 emperors, treated all the people in the world as if they were their own parents. They protected the human race for countless generations, but they never asked for anything from us." Scarlet Taoist smiled proudly as he stared at Long Eyebrow Taoist and said coldly, "How can I repay such kindness? I can only die a horrible death. Today, I'll teach you a lesson, you arrogant, heartless, and conceited people." Long Eyebrow Taoist coughed out a mouthful of blood. Trembling, he pointed his finger at Scarlet Taoist and snapped, "We're heartless?" Scarlet Taoist remained silent for a long while. At last, he nodded slowly and said, "How can that be compared to the kindness of the human race?" Long Eyebrow Taoist raised his right hand and cried out, "Good, good, good. The kindness of the human race, the kindness of the human race. Hee hee, Wang clan actually predicted that I would take you as my disciple. Hee, with your talent." The raging Long Eyebrow Taoist calmed down abruptly and said blandly, "I see. Wang clan is in charge of the cauldron. With her power, of course she can monitor human beings. Who can hide their talent from her? I see. She sent Zhuanshu to visit those top-grade geniuses of the human race in advance. Hee, of course, no matter who I take as my disciple, he will fall into her trap." Sighing slightly, Long Eyebrow Taoist nodded to the other 8 Daozu and said, "We've underestimated her." "Indeed, we've underestimated Wang clan," said White Eyebrow Taoist, who had a pair of silver-white eyebrows and was the number 1 among the 9 Daozu. Long Eyebrow Taoist sighed again. Looking at Scarlet Taoist, he said in a deep voice, "In your next life, you can still be my disciple." Scarlet Taoist chuckled and said, all right, I've had enough of this life. Please, Daozu, spare Gu Chen, and let him be a mortal man for the rest of his life." "How can you know the happiness of a mortal man?" The long-browed Daoist's expression flickered. Daoist Crimson would never be willing to be his disciple again, not even in his next life. The long-browed Daoist had suffered a crushing defeat in this battle against Wang. They had lost completely and utterly. They didn't even have the slightest chance to save their face. Sneering, Long Eyebrow Taoist said blandly, "In this way, you won't even have the chance to be a mortal man in your next life." Scarlet Taoist narrowed his eyes and smiled. Slightly shaking his head, he carelessly began to sing a simple melody. It was a folk song, but filled with a surging vitality. At first, he was a bit out of practice, but soon, he began to sing aloud. Amidst his song, there were creaking sounds of boats, rushing water, fish eagles spreading their wings, and a beautiful and hard-working woman hurriedly casting a fishing net. A drop of purple tears slowly trickled down from the corner of Long Eyebrow Taoist's left eye, instantly transforming into a purple lotus that rose into the air and floated above his head. Sighing slightly, Long Eyebrow Taoist gently lowered his raised right hand. Immediately, the golden body of Scarlet Taoist, which had been tempered through countless trials and tribulations, shattered, transforming into countless streams of purple light and dissipating in the air. A hazy silhouette floated in the hall as Long Eyebrow Taoist said harshly, "I'm asking you for the last time, Scarlet, do you regret it? Are you willing to become my disciple again?" Scarlet Taoist laughed out loud and said, "Please, Daozu, just call me Gu Chen. Even if my soul perishes, even if my flesh and bones turn into mud, I only want to be a human being. Daozu, I, Gu Chen, the fisherman, am a man of flesh and blood, with feelings and desires. I don't want to be an immortal who stands high above the masses and regards all living beings as ants. I only want to be a human being." Long Eyebrow Taoist laughed coldly and said, "You're abandoning yourself to depravity, you're courting death." With a flick of his finger, a thunderbolt struck towards Scarlet Taoist's divine soul. A faint rumble echoed out of the void as a four-legged square cauldron shattered the roof of the Palace of Tao Origin and fell to the ground. A beam of light shone out of the cauldron and sprinkled on Scarlet Taoist's divine soul. Scarlet Taoist's divine soul disintegrated, and only a wisp of his soul was sent into transmigration. Before Long Eyebrow Taoist and the other few Daozu could do anything to the four-legged square cauldron, the myriad spirit cauldron, the origin treasure of Panga world, an unusual change had taken place in the 33 heavens that made Long Eyebrow Taoist cough 3 liters of blood again. Scarlet Taoist had hundreds of trusted disciples under his wing, and many of them were primordial immortals. When Scarlet Taoist's cry of, "I only want to be a human being," resounded through the 36 heavens of Taoism, hundreds of thousands of people from Scarlet City threw away all their magical treasures, took off all their immortal clothes and crowns, laughed and cheered in unison, and detonated their immortal bodies. The cauldron emitted a boundless light that enveloped the souls of these immortals, sending them all into transmigration. The terrible self-detonation of these immortals completely shattered all the restrictive spells in the 33 heavens, and killed countless immortals of the celestial court. The celestial fiends from the outer domains roared and charged upward, all the way to the Hall of Enlightenment of the great celestial emperor Ziwei Lingying. Chapter 993. The 33 heavens and the great spirit vulture mountain were filled with deafening battle cries and rivers of blood, but the scene next to the origin tree of fire was as quiet as ever. Great horns and the other Tao fusing experts were sweating profusely as they kept spewing wisps of true flame that looked like smoke and mist into the heaven refining cauldron, allowing Wu Qi to control the cauldron to refine them into the Pangu's mountains and rivers map. The true flame of the few Tao fusing experts had been consumed to the extreme, to the point that they could no longer bear it. It had been many, many years since they had experienced such a painful feeling, as if all their internal organs were being sucked out and their brains were boiling. Great Horns gasped silently, his eyes fixed on the heaven-refining cauldron as his body trembled violently. The other Almighties also trembled slightly, and there was a trace of fear in their eyes. All of them were cursing Wu Qi in their minds. What the hell is this damned old monster Yuan Ling crafting? How could he control the true flame of a few Tao fusing experts to refine magic treasures with just his cultivation base at the peak of the Tao-breaking realm? Although only a few years had passed in the outside world, millions of years had passed inside the Dark Yin Celestial Tower, where Wu Qi, Great Horns, and the others had worked together to speed up time. The cauldron had been spewing the true flame for millions of years, and the cauldron had been plundering the true flame of Great Horns and the others. Even though they had all reached the realm of Tao fusing, and possessed boundless magic power, they were still tormented by the cauldron. The cauldron, and the few things inside it, were devouring every wisp of power in Great Horns and the others like a black hole. What puzzled them even more was that Wu Qi was not crafting a treasure that could restrain the apotheosis treasures of the 7 Buddhist patriarchs and 9 Tao patriarchs. They could understand why he kept throwing all kinds of rare materials into the cauldron, but what was Wu Qi doing by throwing all kinds of herbs into it from time to time? For this concoction, Great Horns and the others had offered everything they had. In addition to countless rare ores, there were also innate and acquired supreme-grade herbs. They knew some of the herbs and didn't know some of the herbs. However, what Wu Qi put in was not only the herbs they took out, but also some rare materials collected from the primordial heavenly woods in Yuan Ling's nether realm. On top of that, it was not just one thing that kept drawing their power, but many things. They couldn't see the situation inside the heaven-refining cauldron, but they could roughly sense that there were dozens of large objects and millions of thumb-sized and mung bean-sized objects. Could it be that there was some kind of artifact that needed to be assembled with these parts? Great Horns and the others had only opened 5 or 6 of them when it came to artifact crafting and pill concocting, so they naturally had no right to speak in front of Wu Qi. No matter what Wu Qi did, no matter how Wu Qi treated them as large energy sources, the few Tao fusing experts could do nothing but devour the natural energy in the outside world, refining their natal flame and fusing it into the cauldron. But as time went by, the devouring force in the cauldron skyrocketed, giving Great Horns and the others the illusion that their bone marrow was being pulled out. What kind of freakish artifact could require such a powerful force to support it? Great Horns' mouth was wide open, with a long tongue hanging from the corner of his mouth and drool dripping down from it. He had made up his mind that when the concoction was over, he would give Wu Qi a good beating. Otherwise, he would not be able to vent his anger. How many years had it been since he fused with the Tao? Who could make a Tao fusing expert work like a dog? Wu Qi had done it. All of a sudden, Wu Qi, who had been throwing all kinds of materials and herbs into the cauldron for millions of years, rose to his feet and stepped into the cauldron. All of a sudden, Wu Qi's body turned illusory and turned into a cloud of rich natural energy. Except for the largest object in the cauldron, all the other small objects had fused into Wu Qi's body, turning into a misty mass of primal energy that kept spinning. Wu Qi was smuggling. Great Horns and the others had provided Wu Qi with their natal flame so that he could craft the Pangu's map to fight against the 7 Buddhist patriarchs and 9 Tao patriarchs. But Wu Qi felt that it was a waste of time to just sit there and do nothing while crafting a supreme artifact of primal. In his previous life, Yuan Ling had wanted to improve his fleshly body to the level of invincibility with the Heaven Refining Unity Art, the most powerful and bizarre chapter of the Heaven Refining Grand Magic he had comprehended, and truly reach the realm of the strongest fleshly body among all Chaos Fiend gods. But in his previous life, Yuan Ling's cultivation base was not very strong. He had worked hard for a long time, but he could not gather all the materials he needed, and he did not have enough cultivation base to melt the materials he obtained. But this time, he had a few mighty Tao fusing experts to selflessly provide him with their natal true flames, and countless materials to waste at his will. Wu Qi immediately thought of the last chapter of the Heaven Refining Grand Magic, the Heaven Refining Unity Art. During the hundreds of years of boring refinement, Wu Qi had used 50% of their natal flame to craft magical treasures, and the other 50% to cultivate the Heaven Refining Unity Art. In any case, although these guys were Tao fusing experts, they basically knew nothing about alchemy and artifact refinement, so they had to endure whatever Wu Qi did. For millions of years, Wu Qi had been controlling the natal flame of great horns and the others, refining and purifying their flames. The first wisp of innate thievery energy permeated the surroundings at all times, and by analyzing their natal flame, Wu Qi had gradually mastered their innate divine abilities and the various great Taos of heaven and earth they had comprehended. The true flame of a Tao integration stage mighty figure was extremely precious. They wouldn't use it for no good reason, and they certainly wouldn't allow outsiders to see what their true flame looked like. But by chance, Great Horns and the others had offered their natal flame to Wu Qi when he was crafting magical treasures this time. The natal true flame was the fusion of one's spirit, energy, and soul with the great Tao of heaven and earth. Wu Qi did not steal the spirit, energy, and soul of Great Horns and the others, but he had stolen all the great Tao of heaven and earth in their natal true flame over the past millions of years. It was like how Great Horns and the others had taught Wu Qi their great Taos for millions of years, but they had never taught their disciples with such dedication. At this moment, the few almighty experts' comprehension of the great Taos had merged into one in Wu Qi's body. In Panga world, when it came to the mastery of the great Taos, even the 7 Buddhist patriarchs and the 9 Tao patriarchs could not compare to Wu Qi. Because of the continuous improvement of his cultivation base, Wu Qi's divine sense had reached the level of Tao fusing realm, and his magic power and cultivation base were as profound as the ocean. His magic power and cultivation base were as vast and unfathomable as the ocean. The so-called peak-level Tao breaking experts were no match for him. At this moment, he could be described as a half-step Tao fusing expert. But, after absorbing the insights of the heavenly Tao from Great Horns and others, Wu Qi had many other thoughts on when and how to fuse with the Tao, and whether or not to do it. Inside Heaven Refining Cauldron, dozens of powerful magical artifacts that were almost as powerful as chaotic spirit treasures were absorbed by Wu Qi before they could take shape, and a huge number of spirit pills of various colors were swallowed by Wu Qi in one gulp. The enormous energy contained in these artifacts and spirit pills was constantly tempered into every tiny part of his body by Wu Qi by exercising the Heaven Refining Grand Magic. He was sweating profusely, and the drops of sweat were refined into sparkling purple pearls in the cauldron. Following Wu Qi's will, the pearls turned into streams of light and flew out of the cauldron, constantly replenishing the bodies of Great Horns and the others. These pearls were the impurities expelled from Wu Qi's body, but even these impurities were top-grade divine pills in Panga world. Putting aside their other effects, they were top-grade divine pills for replenishing energy consumption. Great Horns and the others, who were so tired that they were about to faint, immediately perked up. A tremendous aura emanated from them, and their dim natal true flames became unstoppable, pouring into Heaven Refining Cauldron like a raging river. Wu Qi had reached the final realm of the Heaven Refining Harmonizing Art. Every breath he took 36 years, and the natal true flames of the few Tao fusing experts burned his body directly, making him feel excruciating pain. At the same time, they kept expelling the unwanted impurities from his body, pushing his body to a realm that Wu Qi had always wanted to reach in his previous life, but did not have the strength to do so. 90% of the belongings of the few Tao fusing experts, and almost 80% of the materials in Yuan Ling's nether realm, turned into endless streams of heat to smelt Wu Qi's true body, and the enormous energy nearly blew up Wu Qi's divine soul and body. But, with the help of Great Horns and the others, under Wu Qi's control, their natal true flames transformed into a thick and heavy barrier of fire, firmly binding Wu Qi's body and forcing the astonishing energy to flow slowly through his body according to Wu Qi's will. One purple pearl after another flew out of heaven refining cauldron and fused into the bodies of great horns and the others, while the natal true flames poured in from the outside world frantically tempered Wu Qi's body. A mass of hostility accumulated in Wu Qi's chest as his cultivation technique gradually reached the Mahayana level. The visible impurities in his body turned into pearls and flew out, while the invisible impurities turned into the mass of hostility and piled up in his chest. Like a nuclear fusion reaction, as the hostility grew, a dazzling light gradually burst out of Wu Qi's chest, and the terrible heat even forced the natal true flames of great horns and the others to disperse in all directions. Flames spewed out of Wu Qi's pores, bringing out the last bit of impurities in his body. Inside heaven refining cauldron, a mass of dark mist was spinning slowly. It was the mass of energy Wu Qi had refined into Pangu's map of mountains and rivers for millions of years. Just like the chaos before the creation of heaven and earth, this mass of energy contained the true form of the magical treasure Wu Qi wanted to craft, and he was just waiting for an opportunity to break it. All of a sudden, Wu Qi opened his mouth and unleashed a raging flame of hostility, smashing fiercely onto the mass of energy. Thunderclaps echoed out of heaven refining cauldron, each of which lasted for 49 years. After a total of 1 yuan worth of thunderclaps, Wu Qi suddenly cried out, "Freeze!" The cauldron trembled violently, and then a column of flame towered into the sky. Holding a mass of white light in his left hand and a mass of black light in his right, Wu Qi slowly flew out of the flame. In his left hand was a seemingly ordinary white, blank book with 3 faintly visible characters on its cover, the Book of Life and Death. Amidst the black light in his right hand was a black writing brush that emanated an eerie chill, and the shaft of the brush was also engraved with 3 sinister characters, Soul Hook Brush. The treasure that Wu Qi used to fight against the investiture of the gods was finally completed. Chapter 994. The Book of Life and Death and the Soul Hook Pen. The 2 treasures were one, and as soon as they appeared, all the natural energy in Pangu world began to fluctuate like a tidal wave. Auspicious light and auspicious energy fluttered chaotically through the void. On the 33 heavens and Great Spirit Vulture Mountain, the demon gods that were wreaking havoc on the countless planets in the outer realms all looked up in astonishment at the auspicious light dancing in the sky. An aura that made them uneasy was echoing across Pangu continent. But, even the strongest celestial fiend gods from the outer heavenly realms could not sense where the aura came from or what it meant. The 2 treasures were crafted with the Pangu's map, which was indeed made from the cornea of the great Saint Pangu, fused with the eyelids of both eyes. Wu Qi separated the eyelids, turning his left eye into the Book of Life and Death and his right eye into the Soul Hook Pen. In Pangu world, all the information of the living beings with Pangu world's natural energy was recorded in the Book of Life and Death. With a gentle wave of the black soul hook pen in his right hand, the pages of the Book of Life and Death in his left hand turned quickly. The Book of Life and Death seemed to be only as thick as a finger, but it had countless pages. Each page was filled with tiny, pitch-black characters. According to the positions of the stars in the universe, Pangu world was divided into several regions, each corresponding to the void in the outer heavenly realms and a continent on Pangu continent. According to the regions, the Book of Life and Death listed the lifespans of humans, immortals, ghosts, monsters, demons, insects, fishes, birds, beasts, flowers, trees, and many other living beings. As Wu Qi waved the pen, the Book of Life and Death stopped abruptly, and the information of Emperor Haozuan was marked on the first page. Emperor Haozuan, the human emperor of the human race, was born in the city of Liangzhu in Yuxiong Plain on Pangu continent. He was born with 120 years of lifespan, and had consumed a spirit fruit to prolong his life by 3 eons. Now, he had 74,594 years left. The soul hook pen touched Emperor Haozuan's name, and the names of the spirit fruits he had consumed to prolong his life, as well as when he had consumed them. All the information flew out of the Book of Life and Death, turning into a small light screen that hovered in front of everyone. Great Horns happily punched Wu Qi in the chest and laughed. "Brother, it's finally done. Hey, let's celebrate." Great Horns said it was a celebration, but he had used all his strength in the punch, hoping to beat Wu Qi into a sorry state with this punch. After all, he had been frantically extracting Great Horns' natal true flame over the past tens of millions of years, and he had almost drained him dry. Great Horns would never forget that uncomfortable feeling for the rest of his life. Therefore, as soon as Wu Qi finished crafting two extraordinary treasures, Great Horns took a deep breath and regained all his strength in a flash, then threw out a punch. Wu Qi didn't even look at Great Horns. He stood firmly where he was and let Great Horns' fist slam into his chest. Followed by a thunderous bang, which sounded like two iron ingots clashing against each other, a buzzing sound came from Wu Qi's chest. His body didn't seem to be made of flesh and blood, instead, it seemed to be made of gold and iron. Gritting his teeth, Great Horns threw his head back and let out a long howl, his left hand clutching his right fist as he stumbled back dozens of steps. With their sharp eyes, Yao Ling and the other Dao fusing experts saw that Great Horns' right hand below the wrist had been completely deformed, and the flesh and bone were trembling slightly, looking as tender and bouncy as tofu pudding. It was clear that all the tissue structure under the skin of his right fist had been shattered by the counterforce, and the flesh and bone had turned into a ball of something that looked like soy milk. The saints looked at Wu Qi in horror, and Wu Shen cried out, "Yuan Ling, old freak, your fleshly body." Disapprovingly, Wu Qi twisted his neck, producing a series of crisp cracking sounds of his joints. "It's nothing," he said coolly, "I've just cultivated the last chapter of my heaven-refining grand magic by chance over the years, and it's just a preliminary achievement. Great Horns, you can't blame me for beating me." Laughing dryly, Great Horns twisted his right hand in a disheveled manner. In the time it took Wu Qi to say that, his right hand had recovered, but the severe pain and shock brought by the shattering of his right fist still lingered in his heart. Gritting his teeth, he stared at Wu Qi and murmured, "What a tough body. I reckon your fleshly body is the strongest among all Chaos Fiend gods now, isn't it?" He clenched his fist and patted his own chest, producing a series of crystal-clear clanking of metal. Nodding his head, Wu Qi said, "I'm afraid so. Unless Jade Devil and Gold Deity are still alive and have made breakthroughs in their cultivation bases, my fleshly body is 100 times stronger than when I was at my peak in my previous life. Well, maybe not 100 times, but 90 times is a safe bet." The saints were aghast, and they gave Wu Qi a look as if they were looking at a monster, not bothering to discuss the matter any further. In his previous life, Yuan Ling's fleshly body ranked in the top 3 among all Chaos Fiend gods, and now it was 100 times stronger than when he was at his peak. What did that mean? In other words, it was not so easy for a Dao fusing expert to hurt Wu Qi, unless they used a supreme treasure of primal to attack him. Yao Ling twitched her mouth and sighed. Yuan Ling is indeed Yuan Ling. What happened? Just now, a bright light flashed across the Book of Life and Death. Under the Celestial Court's list, more than 50 immortal officials with the cultivation base of gold immortals had suddenly died. Hastily, Wu Qi gently pulled the soul-hooking brush, and the souls of dozens of gold immortals were sucked into the Book of Life and Death in an instant. The book released all the formidable energy contained in their souls, turning them into billowing natural energy and feeding it back to Panga World. Dozens of cries of alarm rang out as the wisps of true spirits of these gold immortals were sent directly into the 6 paths of reincarnation without being baptized by the water of the Yellow Springs. There was a flash of light in the Book of Life and Death. After these gold immortals entered the cycle of reincarnation, they were reincarnated into a certain family, and the information of their gender appeared in the Book of Life and Death. However, the data of the dozens of gold immortals had completely disappeared. The souls of dozens of gold immortals were forcibly sucked into the reincarnation by Wu Qi with the Book of Life and Death and the soul-hooking brush, and the enormous power in their immortal souls was turned into natural energy and fed back to Panga World. A purple cloud came down from the sky, and a rain of merit slowly fell. Half of it fused into Wu Qi's body, and the other half went into the Book of Life and Death and the soul-hooking brush. It was not a lot of merit, but it was still 30% of the merit he obtained from killing the sovereign of the Myriad Immortal Alliance. Wu Qi nodded gladly. Sure enough, there was great merit in purging these immortals and Buddhas. Although he did not do it himself, sending their powerful souls into the reincarnation and turning them completely into mortals was in line with the heavenly Tao of Pangu world's interests, so a large amount of merit fell. Wu Qi did not stand on ceremony. He absorbed all the merit into his body and fused it with the power of faith of the people of Yan Huang that he had accumulated over the years. The domineering and majestic aura brought to Wu Qi by the aura of human emperor grew stronger. Wu Qi scanned the world with his divine sense and let out a cry of surprise that was no different from Yao Ling's. What's going on? TSK, is the great vulture mountain in the 33 heavens robbed by bandits? Great horns and the other great saints sent out their divine sense one after another, and to their horror, they found that apart from Pangu continent, which was still a pure land, the void in the outer heavenly realms had long been smashed to pieces. At least 1 million planets in the outer heavenly realms were billowing black smoke, their rocky layers blasted open, and lava and poisonous fire spewed out. Some of the giant planets were spewing smoke tens of millions of miles into the void. Immortals, Buddhist cultivators, and fiend gods from the outer heavenly realms were fighting wildly on these planets, not caring about the damage to the surrounding environment. Some extremely powerful magic spells poured out like raindrops, and some even crushed the planets they were on. The huge planets exploded with a boom, and a terrible force swept up all the immortals, Buddhist cultivators, and fiend gods on them. Only 1 in 10,000 could escape. Not a single immortal could be seen in the 33 heavens, and the once magnificent and majestic palace of the celestial court had become the residence of fiend gods. No one knew what those grotesque fiend gods were up to, but the 33 heavens was now covered with all kinds of slime and spider webs, and all kinds of strange fiend gods were rolling and crawling on the slime of color and smell terrible. A large number of fiend god eggs were hatching, and some baby fiend gods were playing with the unhatched eggs of their own kind. All the immortals had retreated to the Daluotian continent outside the 33 heavens. Terrible purple thunderbolts densely covered the Daluotian continent, turning any fiend god from the outer heavenly realms into ashes as soon as he approached. Judging from the purple thunderbolts, it was not the divine ability of a Dao-breaking expert, but a restrictive spell personally laid out by the 9 Daozu experts. The first 6 peaks of Mount Gajrakota were completely lost, and only the last one, Mount Thunder, was still in the hands of the disciples of the Buddhist League. 18 10,000 miles tall fiend celestial leaders were wielding huge hammers made of bones, smashing at the Buddhist formation above Mount Thunder from time to time. The rumbling noises they produced were 90% similar to the rumbling of thunder. Looking at the dilapidated scene, Wu Qi was at a loss, and so were Great Horns and the others. Although it had taken them nearly 10 million years to craft the Book of Life and Death and the hooking brush, it was only a little more than 9 years in the outside world. In such a short time, why did the Celestial Court and the Buddhist League's most important place look as messy as a sweet potato field that had been ravaged by hundreds of wild boars? Is this retribution? Although Great Horns was a little one-track mind, he was not stupid. The flames in his eyes shot out hundreds of miles long as he looked up at the sky beyond heaven, where Empress Wa's palace was located. They had been busy crafting treasures for Wu Qi over the past few years, so who else could have caused such a ruckus but the one in Empress Wa's palace? As for the other few experts of the Holy Alliance, Great Horns would rather believe that they had been snoring in their lair for the past 10 years. How could they have done such a thing? Everyone turned their eyes to the sky beyond heaven, where Empress Wa's palace was located. A battle that was not very fierce, but extremely fierce, immediately took place in front of them. Great Horns and the others were startled, and they immediately transformed into beams of light and flew toward the sky beyond heaven while cursing. Great Horns kept cursing along the way, "Damn it! How can you bully someone with more people? You want to see who has more people? Let's see who has more brothers." Wu Qi was taken aback. After pondering for a moment, he said a few words to Great Horns through voice transmission, then also transformed into a beam of light and flew away. But Wu Qi did not go there. He went straight back to East Sea City. Chapter 995. In front of the Empress Wa Palace, the 7 Buddhas were fighting against the Yellow Emperor Xianyuan, the Flame Emperor Shenong, and 5 Dao fusing experts of the Holy Alliance. The 5 experts of the Holy Alliance all maintained the original characteristics of the Chaos Fiend Celestial. Some had horns on their heads, while others had scales on their faces. Although 99% of them were in human form, they would intentionally leave behind some special characteristics to show off their origin. The one with a spiral horn sticking out from between his eyebrows and boundless heat radiating from his body was the Chaos Fiend Celestial, Guangzhou. The one with a pair of black wings on his back, each feather made of black flames, was the Chaos Fiend Celestial, Yan Wu. The one with a beautiful face, a fragrant body, and countless bamboo shadows in the void with each strike was the Fiend Celestial, Zhu Qing. The one with a hideous face, a long golden nose, and 2 fangs sticking out of his mouth was the Fiend Celestial, Daemon. Only one head could be seen clearly. The one with disheveled hair and an extremely long colorful waterfall of light was the Fiend Celestial, Wu Wu. Among the 5 Dao fusing experts, Guangzhou was also known as the Bright Sage. He was very active and liked to stir up trouble. If an important minister of the Celestial Court or a Buddha of the Buddhist League was accidentally beaten black and blue while traveling and couldn't find the culprit, it was usually him who did the dirty work. Yan Wu was also known as the Great Feather God. Among the 18 sages of the Holy Alliance, he was the loneliest. He didn't have any relatives or disciples. His favorite thing to do was to wander around. Today, he would stay at one friend's house for a few eons, and tomorrow, he would go to another friend's house for a few yuanhui. He didn't even have a fixed nest, and he was always flapping his wings and flying around. Zhu Qing was also known as Mother Qing. She had a noble and pure personality, and her heart couldn't be any kinder. She would often transform into thousands of clones and roam the world. If weak creatures like cats and dogs were injured or were being chased, she would help them. At this moment, she was a kind mother. However, if any unlucky person dared to provoke her with their strength, she would immediately let them understand how pitiful it was to have a tigress as a mother. She would rule them so that they would not dare to forget this tragic experience even after reincarnation. All the saints called Daemon, Lord of Strength. This guy's true form was a 6-legged, 6-fanged, golden-nosed behemoth born in the chaos. He was born with a tremendous power that could make people despair. If it was purely a tug-of-war of physical strength, the 16 old monsters of the 7 Buddhist patriarchs and 9 Taoist patriarchs would not be as strong as him even if they combined their strength. He was a simple-minded person who loved to wrestle with strength. Anyone who dared to use the word Herculean in the heavenly cycle world would be immediately beaten up by him. In the past, Buddhism had various titles such as the Herculean King Kong and the Herculean Heavenly King. However, since those unlucky guys had all their bones broken by Daemon, the successive Buddhist patriarchs simply removed the word Herculean from the titles of Buddhism. As for Wu Wu, his original form was a ball of colorful light that contained all kinds of heterogeneous energy. He called himself the Flower Lord and loved to plant all kinds of strange flowers and plants. His nest was a vast sea of flowers. Although he did not accept disciples, the various spiritual monsters that cultivated from flowers and trees in his nest treated him as their parents. If one were to ask who had the most disciples among the 18 saints of the Sanctuary Alliance, it would naturally be Wu Wu. 5 mighty figures of the Dao fusing realm, together with the 2 new Dao fusing saints, the Yellow Emperor Xianyuan and the Yen Emperor Shenong, the 7 of them were fighting against the 7 Buddhist patriarchs. However, at the level of the Dao fusing realm, they could not just draw their swords and attack like ordinary cultivators. Instead, they stood in the void and attacked each other with their divine powers and secret techniques. For example, the Buddhist divine powers cultivated by the 7 Buddhist patriarchs had reached an unfathomable level. When they attacked, there was not even a trace of light and shadow. If one was not careful, they would be hit by their spells. The 14 of them were divided into 2 groups and stood frozen with a distance of tens of thousands of miles between them. Occasionally, there was a flash of light in the corner of their eyes and the tip of their eyebrows. Strange ripples flashed across their bodies. With them as the center, the void within a radius of tens of thousands of miles in the heavens beyond heaven fluctuated like boiling rice porridge. However, The frequency of the fluctuation was extremely slow, but the space was extremely distorted as if it would break at any time. However, it maintained such a delicate balance that it would never really break. From time to time, strange phenomena such as lotus flowers, Bodhi trees, clear springs, and golden clouds would appear around the 7 Buddhist patriarchs. Heavenly dragons, fairies, vajras, and other Buddhist holy spirits were faintly discernible. The chanting of Buddhist scriptures could be heard. Sometimes, the Yellow Emperor Xianyuan and the Yen Emperor Shennong, who had the weakest cultivation base, would suddenly retreat for tens of thousands of miles, blood dripping from the corners of their mouths. Occasionally, strange phenomena such as strong light, flying, bamboo shadows, and black holes would appear around the 7 Buddhist patriarchs. Every time, there was a great danger. If a Tao-breaking or Tao-reasoning expert were to appear here, he or she would be smashed into pieces in an instant. The battle had been going on for several years. For Tao-fusing realm experts, several years was just a short moment that was not even enough to take a breath. However, during these years, 6 of the Great Spirit Vulture Mountains had been breached, and only the Thunder Sound Mountain remained intact. Suddenly, Damon's voice rang out, "Ha ha ha ha, old bald bastard, your disciples are screaming miserably. If you don't rush out now, you'll really be hopeless. Ayaya, how many bald heads are chopped off every day?" That head rolling on the ground was truly a sight to behold. It was truly marvelous, truly marvelous. Twisting his fat body, the long nose on his face curled up proudly, Damon provoked them proudly, "How about I fight you with one hand? If the 7 of you can defeat me with one hand, I'll let you leave here." The 7 Buddhist patriarchs were so angry that they almost vomited blood. Competing with Damon in strength? Why don't you compete with the 7 Buddhist patriarchs in chanting scriptures? The hearts of the Buddhist patriarchs were boiling with anger. Their disciples were suffering, but as Buddhist patriarchs, they really could not spare the time to save them. The Buddhist League, which was caught unprepared, suffered extremely heavy losses. This debt of blood would be recorded on Damon and the others. On the other side of the heavens beyond heaven, in front of the gate of Empress Hua's palace, the Huahuang clan, with the myriad spirit cauldron on her head, was besieged by the 9 Daozu. None of the 9 Daozu came with their true bodies. Their true bodies had to guard the primordial Tao palace and protect their disciples. At the same time, they had to suppress the list of deification, preventing the souls in the list of deification from wreaking havoc, and preventing any mistakes from happening to the list of deification. Each of them had created a nascent divinity doppelganger, which rushed into the heavens beyond heaven to settle scores with the Huahuang clan. The Huahuang clan had schemed against them for so many years. Even the first disciple of Long Eyebrow Daoist Scarlet, was a spy planted by the Huahuang clan. Not to mention how many people in the Tao League were actually planted by the Huahuang clan in advance. The 9 Daozu gnashed their teeth in hatred. Instead of cleaning up the mess and killing the fiend celestials of the 33 heavens, they came directly to the Huahuang clan. In the hearts of the 9 Daozu, they also had the idea of using the power of the fiend celestials to weaken the Buddhist League. After all, the 9 Daozu's true bodies were still guarding the primordial Tao palace. No matter how powerful the fiend celestials were, they could not attack the Daoyu Ocean. However, the Buddhist League was different. The 7 Buddhist ancestors were entangled in the heavens beyond heaven, and 6 of the Great Grimoire Mountain's peaks had been breached. As long as the last peak, Mount Thunderclap, was breached, it would be the merciful and wonderful kindness of the Buddha. Therefore, the 9 Daozu doppelgangers each had 70% of their true body's strength. The 9 of them joined forces to besiege the Huahuang clan, but they did not spare any manpower to help the 7 Buddhist ancestors escape. In fact, as long as 2 or 3 of them were sent to suppress Emperor Huang Xianyuan and the rest, the 7 Buddhist ancestors could immediately escape the heavens beyond heaven and return to the Great Grimoire Mountain to take charge of the situation. However, the Daozu could not wait for more monks to die. They pretended that they did not see the 7 Buddhist ancestors' awkward situation and only focused on besieging the Huahuang clan. The Tao ancestor naturally could not attack with sword light and lightning flashing in the sky. That kind of murderous method would embarrass them for no reason. The 9 Daozu trapped the Huahuang clan in the direction of the 9 palaces. They sat down cross-legged and recited the mantra of virtue and virtue. Word by word, each word turned into a lotus of different colors that drifted down. Each lotus contained an enormous power that an ordinary Tao-breaking expert could only obtain after cultivating for a period of time. The lotuses fell like grinding wheels, grinding away the Huahuang clan's defensive spirit light. The 10,000 spirit cauldron hovering above the Huahuang clan's had emitted beams of light to protect her, but the light was being ground away layer by layer. The 9 of them were attacking her together. Even though she had the 10,000 spirit cauldron, the original spirit treasure of Panga world, she was still no match for the 9 Daozu. From time to time, the long-browed Daoist mocked the Huahuang clan. He claimed that he only wanted the Huahuang clan to give him justice, and he wanted the Huahuang clan to tell the 9 Daozu how many other people, like Scarlet Taoist, were hiding in the Tao League. The long-browed Daoist told the Huahuang clan clearly that this time, she had completely infuriated the 9 Daozu, and they had to suppress the Huahuang clan. With the power of the 9 clones, they could certainly suppress the Huahuang clan forever by sacrificing a supreme artifact of primal. When that time came, the Huahuang clan would still not be able to protect the human race, and the 9 Daozu could take their time to clean up the mess, kill all the fiend gods of the outer domains, and continue with the deification plan. Just as the long-browed Daoist was nagging, a flame rushed out of his back. Great horns suddenly flashed out from behind him and gave the Daoist a hard kick on the back of the head. The Daoist howled miserably and fell forward, and the 9 palaces formation of the 9 Daozu disintegrated immediately. The Huahuang clan's eyes flickered with a bright gleam as the 10,000 spirit cauldron smashed the Daoist 108 times in a row, bruising his face and knocking out one of his teeth. Seeing that the 9 Daozu saints had joined hands to help, the 9 Daozu clones turned and fled without saying a word, quickly running to the side of the 7 Buddhist patriarchs. "Don't panic, senior brothers. We're here," cried the Daoist. The 7 Buddhist patriarchs were furious. "You're here now. What were you doing 2 years ago?" With a tacit understanding, both sides stopped fighting. With the 7 Buddhist patriarchs and the 9 Tao patriarchs working together, they had the upper hand in terms of magic power and cultivation base. If they really fought, not even the Huahuang clan and the saints of the Holy Alliance could do anything to them. But, if the Huahuang clan really went all out and made things difficult for the 7 Buddhist patriarchs and the 9 Tao patriarchs, the Tao League and the Buddhist League would be in great trouble. After staring at each other for a long time, the Huahuang clan said coolly, "From now on, no Tao fusing expert is allowed to interfere in anything in Panga world." The Daoist pondered for a moment, then nodded and said, "Even if the Ling dynasty supported by the Tao League takes the place of Diyu," the Huahuang clan sneered and said, "Why don't we just let them gamble on their own fate? You can't even interfere with these fiend gods from outer domains. If that's the case, your disciples can do whatever they want. As long as they have the ability, so what if Diyu is destroyed?" Both sides pondered for a long time, and then the 7 Buddhist patriarchs and the 9 Tao patriarchs agreed in unison. The saints of the Holy Alliance glanced at the smiling Huahuang clan, blinked their eyes, and nodded in agreement. Chapter 996. On the shore of the East Sea, on a large sandy beach, a black turtle shell, tens of miles in diameter, hovered above a clump of dark fiend flame like a huge wok. Tens of thousands of pitch-black metal stakes were buried on the sandy beach, and a large group of soldiers of the East Sea, clad in fully enclosed armors, were standing next to the metal stakes, shouting in a deep voice from time to time. These soldiers had twisted and ferocious skull masks on their faces, and their armors had sharp edges and strange lines, giving them an evil look. Furthermore, these armors were not forged from metal, but formed from some kind of living tissue. If one stared at these armors for a long time, one would have a feeling that these armors were slowly wriggling, sending a chill up one's spine from the soles of one's feet. When Wu Qi returned to the East Sea City, he saw this strange scene on the sandy beach outside the city. It had been nearly 10 years since he last returned to the East Sea City, and Wu Qi was shocked. How could there be such a group of strange soldiers in the East Sea? Every metal stake on the sandy beach was guarded by tens of soldiers, and there were at least 1 million of these soldiers in strange armors on the sandy beach. What they were cultivating was not the real cultivation technique of the human race, but some kind of evil divine ability that was a mixture of puppet fiend cultivation technique and human cultivation technique. Wu Qi opened his primordial Dharma eyes and gave them a glance. The fleshly bodies of these soldiers had transformed into strange half-living, half-dead, half-illusory, and half-real existences. He took out the Book of Life and Death and shone it on these soldiers, and all their information was sent back to him. Their lifespan was still limited, but their lifespan had been extended from about 100 years to 3 periods. On top of that, they did not consume any spirit fruits or medicines, and this was all caused by the cultivation technique they were cultivating. Their souls had become incredibly strong, and their half-illusory bodies had basically merged with their souls, giving them a powerful magic power that human soldiers lacked. What shocked Wu Qi even more was that the souls of these soldiers had formed an organic whole like the internet. Their souls were connected as one, which gave them a very strong divine sense attack and defense, as well as an impeccable combination of attack and defense. When over 1 million soldiers were connected, their souls could almost withstand the divine sense attack of a primordial expert. Wu Qi could not help but grimace. This army was so terrifying that the ordinary East Sea army would not be able to withstand a single blow from them. As for their armors, they were wriggling like living creatures, filled with an immense evil aura, and had all kinds of profound secrets that even Wu Qi could not see through. They were the products of some unique mystic system from the outer heavenly realms, completely different from the Tao of artifact crafting that Wu Qi was familiar with. Tens of thousands of fiend gods from the outer realms were tied to the metal stakes, but now, these cruel and violent fiend gods were crying like lambs, wailing and begging for mercy in all kinds of dialects. Although their language was different from that of Pangu continent, their powerful divine sense could directly convey the message they wanted to express, and their twisted faces fully revealed their despair and fear. These huge fiend gods were tied to the metal poles. If they moved a little too much, the East Sea soldiers, who in Wu Qi's opinion were half human and half fiend, would immediately draw their heavy swords and blades and stab at their vulnerable parts. Many fiend gods had their genitals and eyes cut off or stabbed blind. Weeping and trembling, they knelt on the ground like frightened rabbits, not daring to struggle or move. Wu Qi looked blankly at the tens of thousands of fiend gods who were being tortured. What were they doing? How did these unlucky fools get here before the fiend gods from the outer domain invaded Pangu continent? Just as he was wondering, a chuckle rang out. A beam of colorful light emerged over the huge black turtle shell, and Yi Xia revealed herself triumphantly. Slaves, take out the hearts and blood of these poor little things. Be careful, and if you dare to waste even a drop of blood, I'll send you to the Earth Fire Fiend Cave and burn you for 3 years in order to temper your body. Amidst a clanging sound, swords and knives were drawn. Tens of thousands of fiend gods howled miserably as their chests were cut open, and their hearts were taken out. These fiend gods had a strange body structure. Some of them did not have blood in the conventional sense, and naturally did not have organs such as hearts. So, the soldiers removed their energy cores, then squeezed their bodies with some strange method, squeezing out the viscous fluids that emitted strong energy fluctuations in their bodies. Hundreds of thousands of hearts and cores, which were strangely shaped and emitted all kinds of strange flavors of sourness, sweetness, bitterness, spiciness, and stench, were thrown into the black turtle shell, while streams of viscous, colorful blood and body fluids flew into it as well. The fiend flame burned the huge turtle shell, and the strong heat boiled the blood, turning it into a strange dark green color. Gradually, the hearts and cores melted in the blood. Wu Qi was amazed at the sight. Tens of thousands of celestial fiends actually had hundreds of thousands of hearts and cores, and some special species even had aorta that looked like sweet potato vines dangling from their bodies, with hundreds of hearts hanging from them. Coupled with the memories of Yuan Ling in his previous life, this was the first time Wu Qi had seen such a strange race of fiend gods. A large number of cores and hearts melted, and the fiend flame rose. In just a couple of minutes, the blood, hearts, and cores that filled the turtle shell were melted into a pitch-black, jelly-like object. Yi Xia proudly cast a few incantation gestures that were filled with an evil aura. A green flame emerged out of nowhere, circling around the jelly-like object and burning it for a while. A strange and extremely attractive aroma rose slowly. Smelling this aroma, Wu Qi actually had an uncontrollable desire of hunger. Hunger. Wu Qi paused for a long while. What was Yi Xia doing? Hiding in the clouds, Wu Qi looked down with great interest. Yi Xia clapped her hands proudly. Under the burning of the green flame, the jelly-like object gradually turned colorful and transparent, quivering like a jelly. The jelly was about 7 to 8 miles in diameter. She pouted her little mouth and blew a sharp whistle. Dragon cries rang out one after another. 3,600 little jade dragons, each about 10 feet long, took the lead, followed by 3,600 little golden dragons, 3,600 little silver dragons, 3,600 little white dragons, and 3,600 little black dragons. A total of 18,000 little dragons came whistling over while riding on the gales. The Xiaoyalong in the front was about 10 feet long, while the bigger ones were about 2 feet long, while the smaller ones were only about 1 foot long. Nevertheless, they were all full of spirit power, showing their fangs and brandishing their claws, and releasing a strong dragon aura. These little guys swooped over like a swarm of locusts, nodded excitedly at Yi Xia, then threw themselves onto the huge jelly with drool dripping from their mouths, opened their mouths, and began to devour it. Wu Qi was dumbfounded. If he was not mistaken, these little dragons should be Ao Buzan's children, right? Apart from those Xiaoyalong, how did he produce so many offspring in the past few years? If these little dragons were born to immortal jade bone, how could there be so many species? If they were not born to immortal jade bone, then, where did Ao Buzan hook up with so many women in the past 2 years? Slowly drifting down from the clouds, a few alert little dragons discovered Wu Qi at once. They opened their little mouths and let out childish but fierce dragon roars, ready to attack Wu Qi with flames and thunderbolts. Fortunately, Yi Xia discovered them quickly. She scolded them, then threw herself into Wu Qi's arms excitedly and said, "Demon King, you're back. Qi Xia is preparing rations for these little guys. They eat rotten fish and stinky shrimps all day long, yet they don't grow any taller. It's been so many years, but why are they still like loaches? That old lecher doesn't even care about his children. Look at how thin they are." Wu Qi patted Yi Xia's head and glanced at the little dragons. He could not help but be shocked again. Yi Xia's method was really unimaginable. The rich devil aura in these little dragons had merged with the dragon aura, turning into an aura that was even more powerful and vicious than their original dragon aura. He did not know what Yi Xia had done to them, but these little dragons actually carried a trace of the aura of heavenly ghosts, and their bodies seemed to be able to travel through space at will. Looking at these little dragons in astonishment, Wu Qi asked, "What did you feed them?" Yi Xia tilted her head and was about to tell him about the various ingredients and effects she had fed these little dragons over the years, when a beam of colorful light flew over from the side. In a flash, Princess Xianglu was already at Wu Qi's side. Holding Princess Xianglu and Yi Xia in his arms, Wu Qi summoned a cloud and enveloped the three of them. They hugged for a moment and slightly eased the lovesickness after not seeing each other for 10 years. After a moment of silence, Wu Qi looked at Princess Xianglu and asked in a low voice, "What's the matter? You seem to have something on your mind." Princess Xianglu nodded and said in a deep voice, "The armies of the 6 states have all been given to Diyu. Grandfather and the other emperors of the 5 states, Wu Qi's expression changed slightly. The armies of the 6 states had all been given to Diyu. What kind of joke was this? It had taken Wu Qi a great deal of effort to train up such a huge and elite army in the East Sea. When the 6 states divided their forces, 6/7 of the East Sea's military strength was given to them. But now, the armies of the 6 states had all been given to Diyu. Wu Qi scanned Pangu continent with his divine will. Combined with all the clues he had found, he pondered silently for a while, and soon, he had figured out 90% of the cause and effect. Damn it, they are all the reincarnations of the 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors. Why did I happen to run into them? Ing Zheng, the emperor of Qin, was the reincarnation of Emperor Xuanqiu. Wu Ji, the emperor of Wei, was the reincarnation of Emperor Ku. Chu Ping, the emperor of Chu, was the reincarnation of Fuxi. Tian Wen, the emperor of Qi, was the reincarnation of Emperor Yao. Zhao Sheng, the emperor of Zhao, was the reincarnation of Suiren. What made Wu Qi speechless was that Yan Dan, the emperor of Yan, was the reincarnation of Emperor Shun. But no matter how Wu Qi looked at it, Yan Dan did not have the demeanor of Emperor Shun. Could you imagine the sacred Emperor Shun hiring assassins to kill people? That was exactly what Yan Dan had done. A few years ago, the 6 sacred emperors suddenly comprehended the various things of their past lives, and their divine abilities had reached an incredible level. At the same time, Wu Qi was crafting the Book of Life and Death and the soul-hooking brush in Greathorn's lair, and did not have time to respond. After handing over all the people and armies of the 7 states to Deyu, the 6 sacred emperors came to the East Sea to persuade Princess Zhanglu not to act rashly. Even Yi Xia did not dare to disobey their joint forces, and could only watch as Deyu's power was revived. The return of the sacred emperors to Deyu had boosted the morale of Deyu's people, and the power of the Ling dynasty and the Shizhou dynasty had plummeted. Wu Qi frowned and breathed a deep sigh. If all 6 of them are reincarnations of the sacred emperors, then what am I? Chapter 997. On the jade dais in the main hall of the king of East Sea's mansion, Wu Qi sat on the throne with a frown on his face. Princess Zhanglu sat on his left without saying a word. Like Wu Qi, she was expressionless like a wooden statue. Yi Xia sat on Wu Qi's right, twisting and turning like a caterpillar, yawning and making faces from time to time. Gusts of chilly wind blew across the ground in the great hall from time to time. These were all her little tricks. The chilly wind lifted the corner of Huang Liang's battle robe. Like a loyal dog, Huang Liang was staring fixedly at Wu Qi, observing the slightest change in Wu Qi's expression. If Wu Qi gave the order to attack at this moment, Huang Liang would immediately bring the army of the East Sea and tear everyone in that target to pieces. Beside Huang Liang, hundreds of generals trained by the East Sea were also staring at Wu Qi with solemn eyes. These generals were the most loyal to Wu Qi in the entire East Sea. To them, Wu Qi was like a teacher and a father, and it was Wu Qi who had given them the strength and power they had today. The chilly wind lifted Lu Qingfeng's robe at the same time. Lu Qingfeng, who was frowning as well, sighed softly. He was surrounded by many civil officials of the East Sea. These civil officials were the elites in political affairs that the East Sea had cultivated over the years. But, after all, the natives of Panga continent were simple and honest, and they were not as quick-witted as the civil officials of the 6 states. But now that the forces of the 6 states had all been withdrawn and merged into Deyu, and all the civil and military officials of the 6 states were under Deyu's control, the only thing they could do was to promote these civil officials of the East Sea to many positions in a hurry. Fortunately, Wu Qi had taken precautions and used Dark Yin Celestial Tower to accelerate time to train tens of millions of civil officials in the East Sea. So, after the sudden incident of the 6 states, the administrative system of the East Sea was not greatly affected. Batches of new soldiers had also been trained in the underground spirit caves, barely filling the gap in the military power of the East Sea after the 6 states merged into Deyu. But, these newly trained soldiers had not gone through any battle, so their overall strength was far inferior to the original army of the East Sea. Fortunately, Yi Xia had trained millions of half-fiend and half-human soldiers for the East Sea with the means of the Fiend League. This army was brutal, and had an amazing fighting capacity. Especially when their souls were controlled by Yi Xia, there was absolutely no problem in their loyalty. After the incident of the 6 states, the Fiend army of the East Sea took the initiative to attack the territory of the Ling dynasty, slaughtering 3,000 major cities of the Ling dynasty. Only then did they deter the restless Ling dynasty, preventing it from shaking the territory actually controlled by the East Sea. Apart from Lu Qingfeng who stayed in the East Sea, the only people from the 6 states who remained under Wu Qi were Yan Bugui, Xiangyu, and Huhai. Yen Bugue was in charge of the punishment court, the largest intelligence agency in the East Sea, and he lived a good life in the East Sea. In the East Sea, he was the biggest leader of the punishment court. But, if he went to Diyu, he could at most be a criminal officer in the punishment court of Diyu. So, Yen Bugue stayed in the East Sea. As for Xiangyu and Huhai, Xiangyu had sworn to serve Wu Qi to the death, so he stayed with the Xiang clan. Huhai, on the other hand, was a loner. He had a strange character, and did not get along well with the civil and military officials of Daqin, nor was he close to his elder brother, Fu Su. Therefore, he simply stayed in the East Sea and took the initiative to become Xiangyu's deputy. Wu Qi looked at the remaining forces in the Great Hall in the East Sea, then suddenly sighed and said, "How magnificent was the gathering of heroes in this Great Hall that day. Why do I feel so cold today?" Sitting cross-legged on the ground, Eo Buzan suddenly sneezed. He pointed a finger at Xia and cried out, "My lord, if you don't tell this little girl to stop quickly, the cold wind will make everyone feel cold, and we will all fall sick with a fever." Immortal Jadebone and a few other female fiend immortals sat around Eo Buzan, looking at Eo Buzan with a smile on their faces. Immortal Jadebone was subdued by Eo Buzan years ago, and during the 10 years when Wu Qi was concentrating on refining treasures, Eo Buzan had a few more powerful female fiends around him, and his offspring had grown several times stronger. It was not hard to imagine the background of these female fiend immortals. After listening to Eo Buzan's complaint, Wu Qi patted Xia on the head. Xia immediately sat up straight and withdrew the cold wind in the Great Hall. A little annoyed, he rose to his feet and walked down the jade platform. After pacing back and forth in the Great Hall, Wu Qi snorted coldly and said, "These majesties are too outrageous. Even if they are the reincarnations of saint emperors, it's fine if they go back to Diyu by themselves, but why do they have to bring so many people back with them? I don't mind those ordinary people, but my East Sea army. Since when did the East Sea become Diyu's training camp?" Huang Liang took 2 steps forward and bowed to Wu Qi. "Your Highness, the soldiers of the East Sea are very loyal to you. At least 99% of them will flee back to the East Sea at your command." Lu Qingfeng added, "But this way, we will have shed all pretense of cordiality with Diyu." Wu Qi gently rubbed his cheeks with both hands and murmured, "This face. TSK, it will happen sooner or later, right? But now that the 6 of them have returned to Diyu, the details of the East Sea will be known. This is going to be a headache." After carefully pondering for a while, Yan Dan and the other 5 knew quite a lot about the East Sea. Fortunately, they did not know about the underhand sect and the Buddhist dojo that Beiji presided over. Even if they did hear about it, they would not know too much about it. Wu Qi still had some trump cards he could play. But it was still a very uncomfortable thing. Wu Qi felt that Diyu had probably found out the color of his underwear. Just as he was hesitating whether he should follow Huang Liang's suggestion and recall the East Sea soldiers who were absolutely loyal to Wu Qi, a general on duty in the prince's mansion strode into the Great Hall. He cupped his fists at Wu Qi and said, "Your Highness, there is an old woman outside the door who wishes to see you." The general said hesitantly, "The woman is dressed in rags and looks like an ordinary woman. But no matter how hard the guards at the door try to chase her away, they can't do anything to her." Wu Qi was stunned. His divine sense, which had reached the level of Dao fusing, quickly shrouded the front door of the prince's mansion. He did not purposely conceal his aura. When the divine sense of a Dao fusing realm was released, an ordinary person would not be able to detect anything unusual. However, in the eyes of the mighty figures above the Tai realm, it would be a vast expanse of majestic purple gas that quickly shrouded the entire prince's mansion. The faintly discernible suppressive aura made everyone hold their breath, not daring to make a sound. Sitting on the throne, Xia clenched her fists in excitement. She murmured, "The demonic king really did not disappoint Xia. It has only been a few years, but his divine sense has already surpassed Xia's by so much." A few years ago, the demonic king was still being beaten by Xia. But now, Xia is far inferior to him. In front of the king of East Sea's mansion, an old woman about 5 feet tall, dressed in rags and holding a bamboo basket stood trembling in the middle of the gate. She squinted her eyes and peered into the prince's mansion. Hundreds of guards of the prince's mansion had formed a circle around her. Each of them was baring their fangs and brandishing their claws, but they could not move at all. Clearly, they wanted to drive the woman away, but they were restrained by someone with a restrictive spell. Under the divine sense of ordinary people, this woman was just an ordinary old woman. Even Princess Xianglu and Yi Xia did not notice anything unusual. But under the divine sense of Wu Qi, he could see that every thread on the old woman's clothes was emitting thousands of rays of light. The lumps of soil on her clothes were actually thumb-sized pearls with all kinds of mystical properties. The old woman was not what she looked like on the outside. She was clearly a noble, graceful, and beautiful young woman. The auspicious purple light swirled around her, and there was a strong sense of kindness and love in her boundless majesty. Wu Qi sucked in a cold breath. Disrespecting Xiang Ao, he said in a deep voice, "Come with me to welcome the honored guest. An old acquaintance of mine is here." Ao Buzan was stroking Immortal Jadebone's thigh. When he heard Wu Qi's words, he jumped to his feet and laughed. "Which old acquaintance? Hee, is it that Great Horns?" When Lao Tzu met him for the first time, he almost took Great Horns as a woman and had sex with him. Hee. I wonder if he still remembers Lao Tzu. A chill ran down Wu Qi's spine. He gave Ao Buzan a fierce glare, then hurried to the front door with all the civil and military officials of the East Sea in the Great Hall. From a distance, Wu Qi ordered the people to open the front door, then bowed deeply to the woman and said, "My Lady Empress Hua, please forgive me for not going out to meet you." Ao Buzan's eyelids twitched, and a gleam flickered in his eyes. He had used his chaotic Zhu Long's innate divine ability to see through the old woman's disguise. He cleared his throat and put on the look of a gentleman, then cupped his fist and bowed deeply to the Wahuang clan. "It turns out that the Wahuang clan is here. Hee, you've brought a lot of trouble to those bald donkeys and ox noses. TSK. How many of their disciples and grand-disciples have died in the last 2 years? Lao Tzu has taken advantage of this opportunity to have a good meal." The sound of saliva rolling could be heard as Ao Buzan stuck out his tongue and licked his lips. Beside him, Catfish, Gold Horn, and the other fierce deities were also licking the corners of their mouths, savoring the aftertaste. Wu Qi's face blushed. "What kind of bastards are around me?" He laughed dryly, then turned to the Wahuang clan and said, "My lady, please come into my mansion and serve me some tea. Yuanling has the finest spirit tea grown in Yuanling's nether realm. I dare not say anything about other vengeful spirits, but when it comes to tea leaves, the little resources of all my old friends combined are not even as good as those produced in Yuanling's nether realm." The Wahuang clan smiled faintly. Purple mist rose from her body, and she returned to her original appearance. Almost instinctively, all the soldiers of East Sea dropped to their knees, touched their foreheads to the ground, and bowed deeply to the Wahuang clan. It was an instinctive reverence for the Lady Saint who created their own race in the human bloodline. It was like a lamb kneeling at its mother's breast, or a crow feeding on its mother's breast. It was a natural instinct that could never be erased. "You're too polite, my old friend Yuanling," the Wahuang clan chuckled and said, "It has been many years since I last tasted the spirit tea grown in Yuanling's nether realm. You don't have to be so polite, my old friend. I, Nuwa, have come here today because I have something to ask of you." Ao Buzan's eyes went wide as he stared at the Wahuang clan. Being stared at by Ao Buzan's strange gaze, the Wahuang clan glared angrily at Ao Buzan and snapped, "You're a troublemaker. Why are you staring at me like that? Back then, if I hadn't protected a wisp of your true spirit with the 10,000 spirit cauldron, allowing you to reincarnate and nurture your soul, how could you return to your original appearance today?" Ao Buzan was taken aback. Hastily, he bowed solemnly to the Wahuang clan and expressed his gratitude. Since the Wahuang clan had said that, it must be true. Back then, when he raped that Chaos Fiend god, he was killed by the Chaos Fiend god, who was so furious and ashamed that he exploded himself. Initially, he thought that his soul should have perished, but now, he was able to return to his original appearance. He felt that he owed the Huang clan a great favor. Wu Qi's heart skipped a beat. Ao Buzan was protected by the Huang clan. Then, how did he, who was killed by dozens of chaos fiend gods, manage to reincarnate safely? Chapter 998. In the main hall of the King of East Sea, 2 thrones were placed on the left and the right. Huang clan sat on the seat of honor, while Wu Qi sat on the seat of honor. Princess Zhang Lu and Yi Xia were boiling water and making tea, while Ao Buzan and the others stood respectfully in the hall, without making any sound. Ao Buzan owed Huang clan his life. Although he was a bit of a bastard, he valued kindness very much, and that was the reason why he had been serving Wu Qi as his master. Huang clan had saved his life, so he naturally had to show respect to her. As for the others, Lu Qingfeng and the others were pure human beings, and they naturally admired and respected Huang clan. Immortal Jadebone and the other female immortals under Ao Buzan's control knew about Huang clan's background, so they dared not to show any disrespect to her. Holding the translucent jade cup and taking a sip of the fragrant tea, Huang clan nodded in satisfaction, smiled, and said, "It's indeed a supreme tea. The few divine teas in Empress Wa's palace are far from being comparable to it. Has Yuan Ling, my old friend, taken back Yuan Ling's nether realm?" Wu Qi slowly nodded and said in a deep voice, "Indeed, it has been taken back. Fortunately, no one has broken into Yuan Ling's nest these years. Everything in it is still intact." Huang clan smiled and didn't say another word. She tasted the tea with an appreciative smile, and Princess Zhang Lu poured her a new cup of tea. After 3 cups of wine, Wu Qi asked, "Back then, in the depths of the chaos, in front of the ancient holy palace, Yuan Ling was attacked by the 7 Buddhist patriarchs, the 9 Tao patriarchs, and over 30 chaos monsters. He thought that he would die for sure, but luckily, he escaped into the reincarnation of Pan Gu world, and survived Yuan Ling. Do you know why?" Putting down the teacup, Huang clan nodded and said, "Back then, Saint Pan Gu had just created the Pan Gu world. His soul and 90% of his life force transformed into the 10,000 spirit cauldron, which Nuwa found. The 10,000 spirits cauldron was the original spirit treasure of Pan Gu world. In Pan Gu world, it had countless magical uses. Nuwa just happened to preserve a trace of my old friend Yuan Ling's true spirit and send it into samsara. You don't need to mention such a trivial matter." Sitting down, Ao Buzan laughed out loud and said, "Hee, Huang clan is indeed a Huang clan. You don't need to mention the life-saving grace of Lao Tzu." Glaring at Ao Buzan in anger, Huang clan continued blandly, "My old friend Yuan Ling doesn't need to owe Nuwa a favor. But you lecherous dragon, back then, Nuwa was soft-hearted and saved you. If I had known that you were still evil, I would have let you fly back to Pan Gu world. Now, you've been causing trouble everywhere. You should just return the favor to Nuwa." Ao Buzan didn't say another word. He felt that this was unfair. "Why do I have to return the favor?" Putting down the teacup, Wu Qi nodded and said, "Empress Wa, Holy Mother, please be frank. If there's anything that Yuan Ling can do to help, he will certainly help." Huang clan remained silent for a while, then stood up, bowed to Wu Qi and said, "In this case, Nuwa will be shameless." Wu Qi stood up and bowed back, then said straightforwardly, "But, Empress Wa, please understand that Yuan Ling's cultivation is limited, and he's not capable enough. If it's just a small favor, just mention it, and you can help as many times as you want. But, if you want Yuan Ling to fight those few old bastards, let's talk about it after Yuan Ling fuses with Tao." Covering her mouth, Huang clan laughed and said, "My old friend Yuan Ling used to be so straightforward in the past. How did he become so cunning now?" Shaking her head with a smile, Huang clan said in a low voice, "Of course I won't trouble my old friend Yuan Ling too much. But, Yuan Ling, please agree with me. Now that the 7 Buddhist patriarchs and 9 Tao patriarchs are fighting for the destiny of the human race and trying to use it to help them break through the current shackles, before the fate of the human race is settled, my old friend Yuan Ling, please don't make things difficult for Du. Wu Qi pondered for a long time, then nodded slowly and said, if they don't make things difficult for me, I won't make things difficult for them. The 6 divine emperors have actually reincarnated countless times in the mortal world. My lady's means are really unpredictable. Hee, those soldiers and horses are a gift from Yuan Ling, but Du can't provoke me, or I'll definitely fight back with all my strength. Smiling, Huang clan nodded and said, how dare they? After all, my old friend Yuan Ling and Zhuanqiu are father and son-in-law. From now on, the East Sea will be independent from Du. You can form your own kingdom or sect. In any case, the eastern region of Panga continent will belong to you from now on. Huang clan deliberately mentioned the father-in-law and son-in-law. Wu Qi blushed and kept cupping his fist and begging for mercy from Huang clan. Among the 90,000 women of 6 dynasties, the karmic entanglement between him and Emperor Zhuanqiu and the other 5 divine emperors could not be separated. Now that Huang clan had promised him that he could form his own kingdom in the East Sea, Wu Qi could only accept it, lest he had to tangle with Zhuanqiu and the others in the future. After chatting and laughing for a while, Huang clan suddenly fell silent. Wu Qi shut his mouth as well. He knew that it was time for Huang clan to pay him a visit. In the eyes of Huang clan and Wu Qi, 90,000 women and son-in-law were just some trivial matters. Something that could make Huang clan visit him in person must not be such a trivial matter. After a moment of silence, Huang clan slowly told him about the agreement she had made with the 18 saints of the Holy Alliance, as well as the 7 Buddhist patriarchs and the 9 Tao patriarchs. Whether it was the fiend gods of the outer heavenly realms or the battles between Du, the Ling dynasty, and the Shizhou dynasty, the almighty experts of Tao fusing realm could only watch from the sidelines and give advice, but could not do anything themselves. The chaotic heavenly secrets continued to be chaotic, and to emerge victorious from it, it was up to the disciples of various powers to work hard. Aside from Tao fusing realm experts, Tao breaking realm experts were the pinnacle existences. According to what Huang clan knew, on the second day after the agreement was made, the leaders of the 99 sects of the 33 heavens of Tao League and the first-generation sect leaders of the 100 sects of Buddhism came out in full force. These 199 people were all almighty experts of Tao breaking realm, and they had countless disciples. For example, the current Lord Buddha of Buddhism, Amitabha, was merely a disciple of the Heart sect, the first sect among the 100 sects of Buddhism. However, Tao-breaking grandmasters could not do anything themselves. Most of the schemes and battles were presided over by the almighty experts of Tai realm, while the Golden Immortals and Heaven Immortals carried out all the strategic planning. It was like a chaotic chess game. The players were already in position, busily deploying troops and arranging chess pieces. In addition to the 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors in the history of the human race, who had attained immortal bodies by virtue of immeasurable virtues, the 24 emperors of Great Yu, who were the earliest emperors after the founding of the human race, had left their places of seclusion. The blind old man who taught Wu Qi the true body of heaven and earth scripture was Blind So, one of the 24 emperors. Except for Yao Shun, who joined the 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors, the other 22 emperors were either cultivating in seclusion or traveling around Panga continent, looking for loyal and reliable people to pass on all kinds of mystic arts of the human race. They had cultivated an extremely powerful force among the people of Du. Now that the 6 states had returned to Du, and the 22 emperors had handed over the forces they had cultivated over the years to Du, Yu dynasty's reputation had soared, and its overall strength was several times stronger than when Wu Qi first came to Panga continent. Now, Great Yu had a strong army and numerous experts. Its only shortcoming was that Tao League and Buddhist League had a large number of supreme treasures of primal, chaotic spirit artifacts, innate spirit artifacts, and many other precious treasures, as well as countless powerful acquired treasures. The only thing Du could bring out were the supreme towers, which were made with countless materials. But, the highest grade of the supreme tower was only comparable to an innate spirit artifact. At this point, the Wawang clan slowly pulled out some treasures from under his sleeves, which emitted a strong aura of virtue. These were all treasures that Wu Qi was very familiar with. They were the personal treasures of the emperors of the 6 states, including the chariot of 8 horses, which had fallen into Wu Qi's hands from Ing Zheng's hands, and then left Wu Qi after the Great Change. There were thousands of these artifacts of virtue. The Wawang clan took out these artifacts of virtue, which had shrunk to the size of a thumb. With a strange smile on her face, she looked at Wu Qi and said a little embarrassedly, "I know this is too difficult for you, but Yuan Ling, my old friend, please refine these artifacts of virtue again. Try to improve their power as much as you can." Wu Qi trembled slightly. Thousands of artifacts of virtue. He pointed at them and asked dryly, "Where did you get so many artifacts of virtue?" The Wawang clan pursed her lips and smiled. Taoist League and Buddhist League have joined hands to refine the mortal worlds, plundering the virtues from them, she said in a low voice. Nuwa has only benefited a little from it. The emperors of Deyu were all sent into the mortal worlds by Nuwa after their lifespans came to an end, allowing them to accumulate great virtues. Naturally, these artifacts of virtue were created. Speaking of which, this is all the credit of the 7 Buddhist patriarchs and 9 Tao patriarchs. Wu Qi gave the Wawang clan a quick glance. She was so skillful in using others to lay eggs. He wondered what the 7 Buddhist patriarchs and 9 Tao patriarchs would think if they knew the truth. But with so many artifacts of virtue, the last shortcoming of Deyu would no longer exist. As long as Wu Qi could refine these artifacts of virtue a little stronger, those treasures of Taoist League and Buddhist League would definitely suffer greatly when they encountered them. With a wry smile, Wu Qi gave the Wawang clan a thumbs up, nodded, and praised, "The Holy Mother's plan is flawless. Yuan Ling admires you." The Wawang clan smiled. She knew that Wu Qi had agreed to her request. She pulled out 2 exquisite house models the size of fists from her sleeve and said with a smile, "The best inventory of the past generations of Deyu, as well as all the materials that Nuwa has collected from the chaos during her years of guarding the human realm beyond heaven are here. My old friend, Yuan Ling, you can use them at will." Pondering for a short while, the Wawang clan pulled out a golden longsword from the thousands of artifacts of virtue floating around her, emitting strong energy waves and a bright light. She handed the majestic longsword to Wu Qi and said seriously, "My old friend, Yuan Ling, please reforge the Xianyuan sword first. Deyu needs an extremely powerful treasure to stabilize its natural fortune. Don't think about anything else, just improve its power." Wu Qi took over the sword, looked at the Wawang clan, and said in a deep voice, "From a supreme treasure of virtue to a weapon of killing?" The Wawang clan nodded cautiously. Looking at the sky outside the hall, she said blandly, "There are too many disciples of Taoist League and Buddhist League, and Pan-Gu world can't bear them all. For the humankind, they have to suffer." Wu Qi flicked the Xianyuan sword with his fingers, making the sword buzz and let out a dragon roar. Then, he nodded and said, "In this case, Yuan Ling will take this job." The Wawang clan slowly stood up and bowed to Wu Qi. Wu Qi bowed back, then the Wawang clan disappeared. Holding the Xianyuan sword, Wu Qi pondered for a short while, then threw the sword to Yi Xia. "Yi Xia, help me forge the weapon. You, invisible sky devil, use all of your evil tricks this time." Weapons of killing. Hee. Thousands of weapons of killing, she is truly going to kill. Chapter 999. At Wawang clan's request, Wu Qi went into seclusion once again. With his half-step Tao fusing cultivation base, he could barely accelerate the flow of time in Dark Yin Celestial Tower to 1,000,000 times, but it would take too much energy. But, the last thing a cultivator of Scroll of Stealing feared was the consumption of energy. As long as he prepared enough resources in advance, Wu Qi could keep the flow of time 1,000,000 times faster than in the underground spirit cave in East Sea City. All the higher-ups of East Sea had followed Wu Qi into the underground spirit cave to assist Wu Qi in artifact crafting. Although they said they were assisting Wu Qi, in fact, they were just providing some insignificant true flame for Wu Qi to use. Meanwhile, Wu Qi would activate the heaven-refining cauldron to refine and purify their true flame, then mix it with his own understanding of the heavenly Tao and give it back to them. This was equivalent to Wu Qi forcibly improving their cultivation base with the method of imbuing them with wisdom. Even the so-called rapid progress paled in comparison to this speed of improvement. As time went by, the overall strength of East Sea gradually grew stronger. During this period, Wu Qi came out a few times, and so did the other higher-ups of East Sea. Each time, they only spent a few days dealing with the affairs of East Sea, and then returned to the underground spirit cave to continue their cultivation. When Wu Qi came out for the first time, he simply issued an edict to the territory of East Sea. The whole East Sea broke away from Deyu and formed a kingdom of its own. The name of the kingdom was Yan Huang, which was exactly the same as the name of the kingdom of the human race in the world in his body. Wu Qi himself did not delve into the name of the kingdom, but when the news that the East Sea had formed a kingdom of Yan Huang spread, the Yellow Emperor Xianyuan and the Yan Emperor Shenong were stunned for a long time. They had counted on their fingers many times, but they could not figure out why Wu Qi would name his kingdom like this. Only Huang clan smiled. The fact that Wu Qi named his kingdom Yan Huang meant that the kingdom's destiny was connected to the Yellow Emperor and the Yan Emperor. If Deyu was defeated in the future, Deyu's destiny would be inherited by Yan Huang Kingdom, and the destiny of the human race would not be taken by Tao League or Buddhist League. Conversely, if Yan Huang Kingdom was destroyed by the Ling dynasty or the Shizhou dynasty, it would still belong to the human race, and no outsiders would benefit from it. When Yan Huang was founded, its political structure was exactly the same as Great Yu's. Wu Qi was a lazy man, and he did not want to change the social structure or political system. That kind of laborious work was not suitable for him. Great Yu's system had been running for countless eons without any major problems, which proved that it was a pretty good system. Wu Qi had only increased the conscription rate of Yan Huang Kingdom, recruited new soldiers in preparation for the war, and did not take any other special measures. That was all he had done on the surface, but secretly, Wu Qi had been constantly transferring the troops of Yan Huang Kingdom from his inner world to Pangu continent. In just 1 year, Wu Qi had come out of the spirit cave 3 times, and each time, he had transferred a large number of troops from his inner world, which were stationed around the East Sea by Huang Liang. In just these 3 times, Wu Qi had deployed an army equivalent to 2 armies of the East Sea. During this 1 year, the situation on Pangu continent was so turbulent that even the most ordinary mortals could sense that something was wrong. First of all, Wanling City, the capital of the Ling dynasty, avoided the East Sea and moved from the eastern border of Deyu to the south. Kamhart City, the capital of the Shizhou dynasty, was also moved to the south. The capitals of the 2 dynasties faced each other from a distance, staring at the southern territory of Deyu like 2 fierce tigers, ready to pounce. Meanwhile, Great Wu, supported by Wu Qi, had shrunk its defense line again and again, putting on a weak and powerless appearance. Deyu began to deploy a large number of troops on the southern border. With the huge army trained by Wu Qi, Deyu had a lot more room to mobilize. In the past, a small military town might only be garrisoned by 100 men, but now, even the smallest military town was garrisoned by thousands of soldiers. For a time, Deyu's military strength was so strong that the Ling dynasty and the Shizhou dynasty dared not to act rashly. But, Deyu's southern territory was in a state of panic, with several powers flaunting their military strength all day long. The sound of a single drum made of dragon skin could travel tens of thousands of miles, and if tens of thousands of such drums were beaten at the same time, the sound of a mighty army could travel tens of millions of miles away, shattering mountains and rocks like a thunderclap. War drums rumbled and hooves pounded. There were very few ordinary people in Deyu's southern territory, as most of them had been moved to the north by Deyu. Emperor Haozuan personally presided over Dingnan City, an important city in the southern territory, putting on a posture of confrontation with the Ling dynasty and the Shizhou dynasty. The stances of the 3 powers were extremely tough, and Great Wu was like a rabbit in front of 3 tigers. Because of the confrontation, Great Wu had a chance to catch its breath and develop. Gigu, Zi and Mod did not return to Deyu with the people of the 6 states. They had promised Wu Qi to support Great Wu, and they had done their best for Great Wu. With their help, Great Wu did not seem to be a match for any of the powers, but if Diyu attacked them in a hurry, they might be badly wounded. In the past year, all the powers had been training their armies and preparing for the war. Although there was no real war yet, all kinds of rumors and prophecies had spread all over the world. For example, they said that Emperor Haozuan was tyrannical and killed his courtiers. For example, they said that Zhang Tingyun was dissolute and raped his own sister. For example, they said that Emperor Wugo was shameless and immoral, and held open meetings in public every day. All kinds of bizarre and jaw-dropping rumors were flying everywhere. Even the people at the bottom of the social ladder would discuss the affairs of their emperors and the emperors of other dynasties during their meals. The vivid details were enough to make Emperor Haozuan and the others vomit blood. Even Wu Tianming, the most honest and dutiful of them all, was hit by the arrows. He was living a peaceful life in Great Wu, but some power had made the first move. Rumors that Wu Tianming was a mentally retarded son of a close relative and was not qualified to preside over a kingdom had spread throughout Great Wu with the wind. The rumors were so fierce that Wu Tianming's father, the emperor, had given birth to Wu Tianming after drinking too much and having an affair with his niece. Every position, every posture, and every movement of his father were described in great detail. As for whether Wu Tianming's father had this niece or not, who would care? Wu Tianming, fuming with rage, immediately sent out countless spies of Great Wu to spread the colorful rumors cooked up by the court scholars to the other three dynasties. In these heartbreaking articles, the reason why the Ling dynasty and the Shizhou dynasty suddenly dispatched troops to Diyu was known to all the people of the three dynasties. Zhang Tingyun and Emperor Wugo had fallen in love with Emperor Haozuan at the same time, and they had sent out a huge army to break into Dingnan city and snatch their beloved Emperor Haozuan back to their country. It was said that Zhang Tingyun had not been intimate with his concubines and palace maids for years because of Emperor Haozuan, and the reason why Emperor Wugo had held an open meeting was that Emperor Haozuan had rejected his proposal. That had dealt the emperor a heavy blow, and that was why he had done such an outrageous thing. Because of the emotional entanglement between Zhang Tingyun, Emperor Wugo, and Emperor Haozuan, none of them was fit to be the human emperor. Emperor Haozuan, as the current human emperor of Diyu, had shown his face in public to flirt with women. This was simply ruining the human wheel. How could he be qualified to rule Diyu? Emperor Haozuan, Zhang Tingyun, and Emperor Wugo were so angry that they almost coughed up blood. It did not take long for a new round of rumors cooked up by the Ling dynasty and the Shizhou dynasty to spread across Pangu continent like a plague. In the new rumors, Wu Tianming had become the illegitimate son of Emperor Haozuan and an important minister of Diyu. As for how Emperor Haozuan had fathered Wu Tianming with an important minister of Diyu, who was also a man, such a technical question was not within the scope of the rumors. Amidst the wave of rumors, Diyu had suffered a great loss. It was fine to have the generals of Diyu, who were all muscles for brains, draw their blades and hack people, and the oracles of Diyu, whose blood was replaced by ghost energy, curse and kill people. But, it was too difficult for the civil and military officials of Diyu to rack their brains to come up with all kinds of rumors to fight back. Fortunately, Diyu had the civil and military officials of the 6 states who had submitted to it. Emperor Haozuan, who was so angry by the rumors, promoted the civil and military officials of the 6 states to be the chief officials of the newly established imperial palace of Diyu, who were responsible for all the official affairs related to Diyu's literary talent. Zhang Yi, Su Qin, Lin Xiangru, and other glib-tongued civil and military officials swarmed forward, spreading rumors and prophecies like a storm. The deadly rumors swept across the entire Pangu continent through the teleportation formations constructed by the officials of Diyu. It was said that when the rumors cooked up by Su Qin, Zhang Yi, and Lin Xiangru came out, even Emperor Wugo, whose state of mind had reached the state of being as calm as a dry well, was so angry that he coughed up blood and smashed a palace to pieces. Amidst the endless attack of rumors, the monarchs of Diyu, the Ling dynasty, the Shizhou dynasty, and Great Wu plummeted in reputation. In the eyes of outsiders, these 4 rascals had become a bunch of bastards who were worse than dog shit. How could they be qualified to be the human emperor? As the saying goes, kill 1,000, lose 800. In this wave of rumors, all 4 states suffered serious losses, and none of them emerged victorious. The enmity between the four states continued to ferment amidst such rumors. Middle-scale conflicts began to break out on the borders, and the number of casualties soared from thousands to tens of thousands every day. Everyone knew that a great war was imminent. Whether it was the Tao League or the Buddhist League, they could not tolerate the situation to continue like this. All they needed was a fuse to detonate the entire southern region. But no one was willing to be the fuse, because the current situation in the southern region had attracted the attention of all the almighty experts of the realm of Tao fusing. Even the fiend gods who were wreaking havoc in the outer heavenly realms did not attract such attention. Anyone who triggered the war was likely to be schemed against and retaliated by the almighty experts of the realm of Tao fusing. So, who dared to take the lead? But, there was a kind of people in the world who were not afraid of death. In the midst of everyone's anticipation, a fuse that no one had expected appeared. Burping and humming a little tune, Aobuzan rode a dark cloud and sneaked into the southern region. Goddess Nuwa, the Yellow Emperor, the Flame Emperor, the 7 Buddhas, the 9 Taoists, and the 18 Saints, the supreme beings of the Panga world, all focused their attention on Aobuzan at the same time. Aobuzan, who rode a dark cloud all the way, shivered all the way. He grumbled and grumbled, not knowing where that inexplicable feeling in his heart came from. After carefully searching for a long time, he still could not find the source of that feeling. Aobuzan could only blame it on the fact that he had spent too much time with immortal Jade Bone last night and had damaged his vital energy. 9 times a night is enough from now on. 18 times is really too much for the body. Sneezing, Aobuzan sneaked all the way south. Chapter 1000. A year had passed in the outside world, but 1,000,000 years had passed in the spirit cave under the East Sea City. It was unclear whether it was at the behest of the Huahuang clan, or because Diyu was trying to appease Wu Qi, but the amount of natural energy flowing into the spirit cave through the spatial tunnel had increased by more than 100 times. As a result, the concentration and quantity of natural energy in the spirit cave under the East Sea City were much higher than before, almost reaching the level of the spirit cave in Yuxiong Plain. After 1,000,000 years of squandering endless natural energy, coupled with the fact that Wu Qi did not hesitate to consume his own energy essence to improve his cultivation base through the enlightenment technique, Aobuzan had gained a great deal of benefits. In particular, Wu Qi had used the heaven refining cauldron to help him refine his natal true flame, all of which had greatly benefited Aobuzan. As he was Arko Zulong in his previous life, his cultivation base and magic power were both extremely formidable. In this life, he was merely following the path of his previous life. Aobuzan's cultivation speed was much faster than that of others, and coupled with the fact that Wu Qi had given him special treatment, Aobuzan had broken through the realm of 9th tier primordial in just 1,000,000 years and reached the 6th tier of Tao breaking. In his previous life, when Aobuzan was blown into ashes, he should have the overall strength of a 1st tier Tao breaking expert. Now that he had finally returned to the 6th tier Tao breaking realm, he was emboldened, and the unscrupulous style of his previous life had returned. Without telling Wu Qi, Aobuzan sneaked out of the East Sea and sped toward the southern region on a dark cloud. As he flew on the cloud, he sang in a low voice a little tune he had made up himself, such as wherever the spear passes, no one can stop it, blood washes the silver spear, and so on. The Tao fusing experts who were watching Aobuzan from strange spaces such as the heavens beyond heavens and the Dalu Ocean were furious. If it were not for their oaths, perhaps no less than 3 Tao fusing experts would have slapped him to death. At the very least, Yao Ling, Zhu Qing, and Lun Yang would definitely make a move. Humming a little tune, Aobuzan strolled happily to the outside of Wanling city of Ling dynasty. When he was still hundreds of miles away from the city, Aobuzan retracted his mist and put on an inconspicuous Taoist robe, then swaggered into the city. Watching the notorious scourge of the chaos demon gods sneak into the city of Wanling, the hearts of the 9 Daozu in the Dalu Ocean city twitched. What was this guy going to do? There was a kind of magical existence that was the kind that would bring disaster wherever it went. There was no doubt that Aobuzan was such a character. As soon as he entered the city of Wanling, he ran into a legendary scene. The favorite son of an important minister of Ling dynasty was galloping wildly on a horse, leading a large group of guards and parading through the streets. Ao Buzan had never known how to give way to others. He stood in the middle of the street in a daze. When the young man charged at him while cursing, Ao Buzan gave him a slap on the face and smashed his head. Grabbing the neck of the gold immortal, Ao Buzan sniffed him, ripped off his clothes, opened his mouth, and shoved him into his mouth. As he chewed the unlucky fellow's bones, a copious amount of golden immortal blood sprayed out of the corner of Ao Buzan's mouth. Looking vaguely at the guards, who were stunned with fear, he said, "Lao Tzu wanted to keep a low profile. Do you know what it means to keep a low profile? But, why did you force Lao Tzu to keep a high profile? Tell me, what are you forcing me to do? Why are you forcing me to do this?" After swallowing the young man in a few bites, a loud siren suddenly echoed out from Wanling City. Countless layers of defensive spells emerged from the surrounding palaces and mansions, connecting into a large area. 100 miles thick, 1,080 layers of defensive formations tightly wrapped the city up. Ao Buzan yawned and looked curiously at the soldiers of Ling Dynasty who were rushing in from all directions. At least 100,000 soldiers of Ling Dynasty had surrounded the city, and among them, 20,000 soldiers of Ling Dynasty were riding flood dragons of various colors. The most elite group of soldiers rode on heavenly dragons whose cultivation base had reached the realm of heaven immortal, while the rest of them rode on flood dragons, which were subspecies of all kinds of strange and bizarre creatures. A strong dragon aura filled the void, as tens of thousands of bows and crossbows were aimed at Ao Buzan. Vaguely, there were immortals hiding in the clouds around him, controlling Ao Buzan remotely with the aura of flying swords and magical treasures. Up in the sky, many military officers were scolding at Ao Buzan, demanding him to suppress his energy, squat down on the ground, and surrender. Laughing strangely, Ao Buzan glanced at the mounts of the soldiers, then unsteadily took off all his clothes. As a dark mist rose slowly from under his feet, he snapped, "You bastards! You are a disgrace to Lao Tzu by being the mounts of these bastards." As the dark mist rose, Ao Buzan revealed his true form as Zhu Long. His body was pitch black, and he had 9 feet under his abdomen, each with 9 claws. His ferocious and bizarre appearance was completely different from the dragons people were familiar with. Ao Buzan threw his head back and gave a long roar. With a gentle flick of his long tail, dozens of immortals of Ling Dynasty who were hiding in the void were whipped out, howling miserably. Ao Buzan's strike was so powerful that the immortals were ripped to pieces and exploded in midair, turning into dozens of clouds of blood mist that looked very dazzling to the eyes. At the same time, the heavenly dragons and flood dragons ridden by the Ling Dynasty soldiers let out a shrill roar. They twisted their bodies frantically and threw the soldiers of Ling Dynasty far away. Wherever Ao Buzan's dark dragon energy passed, all the heavenly dragons and flood dragons retracted their claws, lay down respectfully on the watery clouds, and kept nodding and worshipping Xiang Ao with great respect. The long roars of countless dragons rang out from all directions of Wanling City. Summoned by Ao Buzan's dragon energy, one flood dragon after another soared into the sky and flew quickly towards Xiang Ao. Those inferior dragons still had the appearance of snakes and flood dragons, but their offsprings, who had cultivated to the realm of heaven and gold immortals, had transformed into human forms and were rushing over feverishly. The generals of Ling Dynasty wanted to stop these dragons, but their attempts immediately provoked a violent counterattack from the dragons. A general of Ling Dynasty, whose cultivation base had reached the peak of the second Panga heaven, had just drawn his sword when the true dragon he was riding, who was also a peak-level gold immortal, suddenly turned its head, opened its mouth, and let out a deafening roar. The general, who had no time to defend himself, had blood gushing out of his 7 orifices, and his brain was shaken by the roar. There were more than 500,000 dragons in Wanling City, and behind the city was a vast ocean, where all the dragons sent by the celestial court to Wanling City were stationed. There were even 18 elders of the dragons here, and the 4 elders with the highest cultivation base were 3rd-tier primordial immortals. But, when they sensed the Zhu Long aura emanating from Ao Buzan, and heard the dragon roars that Ao Buzan let out that rang out directly from the depths of the souls of the dragons, the 18 elders of the dragons came whistling over with all their people. The members of the dragon clan who were closest to Ao Buzan had transformed into their human forms and were kneeling on the cloud, while the rest of them were summoning the cloud, their long bodies flying back and forth in it, letting out loud cries of excitement from time to time. Venting his dragon aura to his heart's content, Ao Buzan threw his head back and cried out, "My sons, follow Lao Tzu and stop working for these sons of bitches. Hee, in the future, we'll be the ones riding them. Whoever dares to use Lao Tzu's descendants as mounts will be castrated by Lao Tzu." Dragons valued lineage and social class the most. Influenced by Ao Buzan's Zulong aura, all the members of the dragons around Wanling City roared with joy. Ao Buzan transformed into a human form and flew in front of them on a cloud, while hundreds of thousands of dragons of the Ling dynasty roared and followed Ao Buzan toward the west. After flying for a short distance, Ao Buzan suddenly turned around and ran to the outskirts of Wanling City. "From now on, I, a dragon, will not be your mount anymore. Those of you who have gained sentience and are willing to come with me, let's move now," he cried out. "Ha ha ha, Lao Tzu will go to the East Sea and find you a good place for you to live and multiply. Why do you want to be ridden by someone else?" After a moment of silence, all the creatures in Wanling City burst into a riot. Phoenixes, cyan phoenixes, turtles, crocodiles, white tigers, green deer, and all the other intelligent mounts flew into the sky. Except for a few who had developed feelings for their masters, 90% of the intelligent mounts in Wanling City transformed into human forms and left with Ao Buzan. An exasperated roar echoed out of Wanling Palace. Zhang Tingyun chased after Ao Buzan with a group of civil and military officials of the Ling dynasty. But, Ao Buzan unleashed his Tao-breaking aura unscrupulously, and the terrible spiritual pressure severely wounded 80% of the civil and military officials of the Ling dynasty on the spot. Amidst Ao Buzan's wild laughter, the mighty army of Ling dynasty galloped toward the west. Outside Calming Heart City of the Shizhou dynasty, Ao Buzan played the same trick. A strong dragon aura swept out in all directions. All the dragons of the Buddhist celestial 8 divisions in Calming Heart City flew up into the sky and knelt respectfully to Xiang Ao. After that, they left Calming Heart City proudly. A strong dragon aura spread out in all directions from Panga continent. The dragons of the 33 heavens, the dragons in Mount Gridrakota, and the dragons who were the mounts in the immortal mansions in the universe sensed it as well. Led by some elders of the dragons with formidable cultivation bases, the dragons scattered across Pangu world set out for Panga continent. All the dragons in Dayu had fled in one day, and all the dragons headed straight for the East Sea at Ao Buzan's call. More than 30% of the elite army of Dayu had lost their mounts, and their combat effectiveness had been reduced by at least half. Because of Ao Buzan's sudden appearance, the dragons immediately gathered into a solid fist. When those Tao-fusing experts carefully examined the situation of the dragons for the first time, they were surprised to find that there were Tao-breaking experts among the dragons, and many of them were primordial experts. A large number of dragons served as important ministers in various departments of the Celestial Court, and a department of the Buddhist Celestial 8 divisions was directly composed of members of the dragons. Now that these dragons had joined Ao Buzan, the perverted dragon suddenly had a formidable army under his command. More than 30 great elders of the Tao-breaking realm, more than 1,000 dragons of the primordial realm, countless divine and true dragons of the gold immortal and heaven immortal realms, and they practiced the body-tempering techniques of the Buddhist League, Tao League, and the dragons. The number of this army was astonishing, and their combat effectiveness was even more unsettling. For the first time, the almighty experts of Pangu world realized how powerful the unified dragons were. This did not include the various subspecies of dragons derived from the dragons. The males of the dragons had more or less inherited some of the qualities of Ao Buzan. They had all worked hard to spread the seeds of the dragons everywhere. Therefore, the number of subspecies of the dragons was extremely large, more than 1,000 times that of the pure-blooded dragons. A terrifying number of 1,000 times. All the waters and wetlands near the East Sea were immediately filled with dragons and flood dragons. 3 days after Ao Buzan's trip to the southern region, the Ling dynasty and the Shizhou dynasty launched an all-out attack on Dayu at the same time.